In a world where stories fade into dust, there is a place where they are kept alive. Here, in these endless halls, voices from centuries past whisper once more, and forgotten worlds open their doors to you. Welcome to Audible Archives, where every word endures and every tale finds its voice.
I walked alone on rain-slick streets, chasing whispers no one repeats. A rookie's badge, a steady hand, drawn to places few could stand. Faces fade in the amber light. Truth is patient, truth will bite. Each step carved on a city's skin. I fight the dark, but let it in. Some call me sharp, some call me cold. I just keep the stories told. Every lie leaves a heavy mark. Every truth is just as dark. The street chests, the rules are thin. Every pawn knows where I've been. I learned to trade my for clues and bear the weight of what I lose. Each shadow etched upon my name still burns like an unsolved flame. The city breeze, I hear it call, and I will answer through it all. Years have sharpened every edge, while I've walked too close to the ledge. The names I've cleared, the debts I've paid, still haunt the nights I can't evade. Old friends lost to deeper schemes, their voices echo in my dreams. Some wounds heal, some just pretend, but all roads lead to one last end. I see my face in darkened glass, a stranger shaped by what has passed. The batch feels heavier than the gun, and I cannot undo what's been done. Each case is a scar beneath the skin, each truth a loss I can't win. Yet I still chase what hides from sight, even when wrong feels close to right. The ledge is full, the ink runs deep, and I am sworn to seek that key. If I must fall, I'll fall alone, in a city I always known.
This is Audible Archives. I'm Raul, your writer and host, and this is the end of the line. In this final episode of the case files of Detective S.R.H., the truth doesn't just surface, it bleeds. Detective Stephen Raul Hughes is no longer chasing shadows. He's staring down the heart of the machine, corruption cloaked in scripture, power fed by fear, and a relic that has silenced generations. Saints fall, sins scream, and justice demands a price. Welcome to the final reckoning.
The ashes of truth. The night had fallen with a weight unlike any other Stephen Raul Hughes had known. The sky was a vast, inky black, with a scattering of stars as sharp and distant as the sharp pain of forgotten memories. He was far from the familiar hum of city life, now nestled deep within the shadow of St. Cecilia's Abbey. It was a place whispered about in circles of high society, a relic of the old world, hidden away in a valley that seemed untouched by time itself. The journey here had been long, the path serpentine, winding through hills that grew more desolate as they neared their destination. It was as if the abbey had intentionally buried itself from the world, avoiding all but the rarest of visitors. Hughes could sense something in the air, an electric hum of history and secrets. This place was as much a part of a past he had long since stopped caring about as it was a harbinger of something worse. His mind, always in motion, had been unsettled since he first heard the rumors. A relic, something old and powerful, said to justify the cruel policies propagated by the health ministry. These policies, ones that ensured the rich had every medical luxury they desired while the sick and the poor were left to suffer, were no accident. They were designed, crafted with precision and malice. And this relic, a symbol of divine intervention, was their justification. The abbey loomed before him, a vast, imposing structure of stone and iron that had withstood centuries of storms, wars, and neglect. Its architecture was both grand and oppressive, the walls thick with the weight of centuries, and the air thick with a sense of solemnity that made his pulse quicken. At the entrance, the heavy wooden doors creaked open with a sound that seemed almost too loud for such a solemn place. "Welcome to St. Cecilia's Abbey, Detective Hughes," a voice said from the shadows. It was smooth, soft, and entirely devoid of warmth, as though the person speaking had spent too many years away from human contact. It belonged to Brother Aloy, the Abbey's custodian, an enigmatic figure whose name had crossed Hughes' path only in hushed tones. Aloy was not just the keeper of this place, he was the keeper of its mysteries. And Hughes had a feeling that behind those mysteries lay something far darker than the Abbey's ancient stones suggested. The monk who spoke stood tall, though his frame was slight, a shadow draped in a habit too large for him. His face was gaunt, his skin pale, almost translucent under the flickering candlelight. His eyes, sharp and discerning, gleamed with an unsettling intensity that made Hughes feel as though he were already being judged. "I had expected you sooner," Brother Aloy said, stepping forward to allow Hughes entrance. "It is not often we receive guests of your particular stature." Hughes nodded, offering a brief acknowledgement as he stepped into the Abbey's vast interior. The air was cool, filled with the scent of aged wood and incense. The vastness of the Abbey's main hall stretched above him, with vaulted ceilings that seemed to touch the heavens. The stained glass windows, though dimmed by years of grime, still managed to cast a faint, ethereal light that danced across the stone floors. It was a place where time itself seemed to hold its breath, as if even the past dared not disturb the present. "You must understand," Aloy continued, his voice echoing slightly in the large, empty hall, "this place is sacred. It is not merely a building of stone and mortar, it is a repository of knowledge, of things that should not be unearthed lightly." Hugh's eyes narrowed. He had heard enough of the relic's supposed power to know that whatever Aloy was alluding to, it was not something that belonged in any sacred place. "I am not here for your relic, Brother Aloy," he replied, his voice steady, though he knew better than to trust his instincts. "I am here because of the consequences it has had." The monk did not flinch, though his lips thinned slightly. "You misunderstand," he said, his tone now a little sharper. "The relic does not hold power, it is the symbol of power. And power, Detective Hughes, is a dangerous thing to meddle with." As they spoke, Hughes glanced around, taking in the details of his surroundings. The walls were adorned with paintings that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. Some depicted scenes from the lives of saints, others were more cryptic, showing hazy figures in shadowed corners, their faces half obscured, as if they were part of some larger, forbidden narrative. Brother Aloy stood before the glass-encased relic, his gaunt face illuminated by flickering candlelight. "This relic is not divine, Detective Hughes," he began, his voice tinged with both reverence and fear. "It is ancient, yes, crafted long before this abbey was built. but it was never meant to inspire faith. It was made to control. Hughes frowned, stepping closer to examine the relic. Its surface was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light, as though alive. Control? Of what? Belief, Aloy replied, his eyes darkening. It is said that the relic was created by a sect of scholars, heretics, some would call them, who sought to unify fractured kingdoms through fear. They understood that faith is the strongest weapon of all. When people believe in something greater than themselves, they will accept any suffering, any sacrifice, for the promise of salvation. And the health ministry? Hughes pressed, his voice sharp. They are merely the latest to wield the relic, Aloy admitted. Over centuries, it has passed from church to empire, always serving the same purpose, to justify power. The health ministry discovered its existence decades ago and repurposed it as a symbol of divine sanction. They claimed it guided their policies, but in truth, it was nothing more than a tool, a means to silence dissent and maintain control. Hughes's gaze hardened as he stared at the relic. It's a lie, he muttered. A lie that countless people have died for, Aloy said gravely. Including your wife. Brother Aloy studied him carefully, as though weighing whether or not to grant the request. It is not for just anyone to gaze upon, he said slowly. You must understand that what you seek has a power far beyond your comprehension. I understand more than you think, brother, Hughes replied coolly, his mind racing with the thoughts of the corruption, the lies, and the death that had followed the whispers of the relic's power. His wife, Dr. Mary Hughes, had paid with her life for exposing the scandal. Her tragic death, the strange and unexplained circumstances of it, were forever etched in his mind. He had suspected that the ministry's corruption ran deeper than anyone realized. His wife had uncovered something about the relic before she died, something that would have exposed the truth. Brother Aloy stepped back, his expression unreadable. He gestured to a narrow staircase at the far end of the hall. The relic is kept above, in the chapel. It is not a place for the uninvited. With a glance at the monk, Hughes made his way toward the stairs, each step echoing through the hall like the ticking of a clock. As he ascended, he could feel the weight of the abbey's silence pressing in around him, the walls closing in, as if warning him to turn back. But there was no turning back. He had come too far to let it slip away now. At the top of the stairs, the narrow hallway opened into a small chapel. The air was thick with the scent of incense and dust. At the far end, perched on a pedestal, was the relic. It was encased in glass, though its form could still be seen, an intricately carved object, its surface catching the dim light like a sliver of moonlight trapped within a tomb. The relic was ancient, there was no mistaking that. But there was something about it, something about the way it seemed to pulse with a quiet energy that made Hughes feel as though the very air around it was alive. His instincts told him that this was no simple religious artifact. It had been made to serve a darker purpose. The relic is what binds us all, Brother Aloy said, his voice now more solemn than before. But it is also what will tear us apart. Hughes didn't answer immediately. His mind was too busy, piecing together the fragments of information he had gathered over the years. His wife's research had pointed toward the connection between this object and the powers that be in the health ministry, the ministers who had orchestrated the suffering of the poor, the sick, the vulnerable. She had uncovered something about this relic, something that had sealed her fate. But what was it? What was the true role of the relic in this vast, dark game? Does the health ministry control this relic? Hughes asked, his voice sharp. Brother Aloy didn't reply immediately. Instead, he stared at Hughes with a look that made the detective uneasy. The relic does not belong to the health ministry, he said finally. But they believe it does. They believe it grants them the right to control life and death. And they will do anything to protect that belief. Hughes stared at the relic, his mind racing with possibilities. His wife's death had not been an accident, it had been part of something much larger, something that had started long before her untimely demise. And now, standing in this chapel, he could feel the weight of that truth pressing down on him. There was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. His eyes hardened as he turned back to the monk. Then I will be the one to expose it. I will be the one to end this. Brother Aloy's lips twitched upward, though there was no humor in the expression. You will do no such thing, he said softly. For you, Detective Hughes, are already too far in. The silence in St. Cecilia's Abbey was deafening, pressing in from all sides, as if the stone walls themselves were holding their breath. Stephen Raul Hughes moved cautiously, each step reverberating through the empty halls, echoing in a rhythm that felt both natural and unnatural. The Abbey, so vast and ancient, was full of secrets, and Hughes had come here seeking one, the relic that had been used as both a symbol and a tool of control by the health ministry. As he walked deeper into the Abbey, the air grew colder, and the weight of history seemed to settle on his shoulders. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows against the walls, distorting the shapes of saints and angels in the paintings that lined the corridors. The distant hum of unseen echoes lingered in the air, a reminder that the Abbey was not just a building, but a place steeped in centuries of power, tradition, and whispered fears. It was then that he first saw Brother Aloy, a figure standing at the end of a darkened hallway. He was a middle-aged monk, tall and thin, his robe falling loosely around his gaunt frame. His face was pale, almost unnaturally so, with sharp features that were both stern and weary. His eyes, though tired, had an unsettling intensity to them, like a man who had seen too much and yet was still trapped in the cycle of duty and regret. There was an aura of conflict surrounding him, a tension that radiated from his every movement. It was the kind of unease Hughes had learned to recognize in people who were torn between their moral compass and the weight of their past actions. Brother Aloy didn't speak immediately. He merely regarded Hughes with a gaze that seemed to see through him, as though he were weighing his very soul. The silence stretched out, heavy and expectant, before Aloy's voice broke through the stillness. You have come to learn of the relic, Aloy said, his voice quiet but filled with an unshakable certainty. But not all things are meant to be known. Hughes didn't flinch. His mind was already working, analyzing every word, every pause. He had suspected that Aloy, despite his role as the Abbey's custodian, was more than just a monk. There was something about him, something hidden beneath the solemnity of his vows, that made Hughes uneasy. He was a man burdened by secrets, weighed down by the knowledge of something far darker than the Abbey's holy facade could ever suggest. I've heard enough to know that there's more to this relic than you're letting on, Hughes replied, his voice low and steady. It's not just a religious artifact, is it? Brother Aloy's expression shifted, a shadow passing over his face. His lips parted, as though to speak, but then he hesitated, choosing his words with care. The relic is something that has been with us for centuries. It is not simply an object of worship, it is a tool. A symbol of power, both divine and human. It has been used to cement the Church's influence over kings, emperors, and even the most powerful political leaders. Hughes took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the weight of Eloy's words. "The health ministry," he said, his voice sharp with realization. "They're using it, aren't they? They've been using it to justify their actions, their cruelty." A flicker of guilt passed over Brother Eloy's face, but it was gone before Hughes could be sure of it. The monk sighed deeply, as though the act of speaking about the relic was itself a burden too great to bear. He lowered his eyes for a moment, then raised them again to meet Hughes' gaze. "Yes," Eloy admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The health ministry has used the relic as a means to justify their policies. It is their foundation, their rationale. They tell the public that the relic grants them the divine right to determine who lives and who dies. They claim that those who are unworthy of medical care are being punished for their sins, and that the relic is their guide in choosing who deserves to live." Hughes felt a chill run down his spine as Eloy spoke. He had long suspected that something much larger was at play behind the ministry's cruel policies, but hearing it spoken aloud, from the lips of a man who had been so close to the source, was something entirely different. This was not just a political conspiracy, it was an abuse of the sacred, a perversion of faith itself. "You've seen the consequences of this," Hughes said, his voice softening, almost as if he were speaking to a man who might have been his equal at some point. "You know what they've done, the lives they've destroyed. And you've been part of it, haven't you?" Brother Eloy stiffened, his body tense with a mix of defensiveness and shame. "I have done what I was bound to do," he replied, his tone now tinged with something like self-loathing. "I am the custodian of the relic. It is my duty to protect it, to ensure that it remains safe from those who would misuse it. But the truth is more complicated than you realize, Detective Hughes. The relic was never meant to be used this way. It was never meant to be a tool of political manipulation. But over the centuries, its true purpose has been twisted. And now, those who hold it believe they are doing the will of God." Hughes stepped closer, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and sadness. He had seen the brutality of the health ministry firsthand, how they had taken everything from the vulnerable and given nothing in return. He had seen the suffering of the sick, the poor, the elderly, all discarded by a system that claimed to be protecting them while feeding off their misery. "And you just let them," Hughes said, his voice rising slightly with the intensity of his emotion. "You let them use it to justify denying healthcare to people who need it. You let them twist something holy into a weapon of oppression." Eloy looked down at the floor, as though the weight of Hughes' words had struck him harder than any physical blow could. "I had no choice," he muttered, the words almost inaudible. "I am bound to this place. Bound to the relic. It is not something that can be discarded so easily. Those who come for it come with power, and power is not something one can simply defy." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the tension between them palpable. Hughes, ever the detective, could see the inner conflict churning within Eloy. This was a man who was trapped, not just by his duty, but by his guilt. He was a man who had once believed in the sanctity of the Abbey, in the righteousness of the relic's power, only to find himself complicit in a system of injustice that contradicted everything the relic was supposed to represent. Hughes took a step back, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do. He had to expose the truth, to take the relic from this place and show the world the evil that had been hidden for so long. But he could not do it alone. Not against the forces that controlled the relic's power. "You don't have to be part of this anymore," Hughes said softly, his tone almost pleading. There's still time to stop them. To expose the truth. Aloy looked up, meeting Hugh's gaze for the first time with an expression that was equal parts sorrow and resolve. I have already done what I can, he replied quietly. But you are right. The time has come for someone to end this. I can no longer stand by and watch as this abomination continues. Hughes knew that Aloy's words were as much a confession as they were a final admission of guilt. The monk was no longer the man who had first greeted him at the door, he had become something else entirely. He had seen the truth of what the relic had done, and now, at long last, he was ready to face the consequences. Then we end it together, Hughes said, his voice firm. Aloy nodded slowly, his face a mask of determination mixed with the deep sorrow of someone who had lost much but was ready to do whatever it took to set things right. The battle for the truth had only just begun. The walls of St. Cecilia's Abbey had seemed imposing when Hughes first entered, but now, as the confession unfolded before him, they felt like a tomb closing in. Brother Aloy, once a figure of stoic reverence, now stood before him, a broken man, revealing the darker truths that had haunted him for years. The air in the room grew heavier, thick with the weight of the secrets the monk had kept hidden for far too long. Hughes stood still, his eyes fixed on Aloy. He had long suspected that the relic was not just an object of veneration but a tool of manipulation, a weapon in the hands of the corrupt. But nothing had prepared him for the extent of the betrayal, nor for the role Aloy had played in it. Aloy sat slumped against the cold stone wall, his trembling hands clutching a small silver cross. I was complicit, he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt. I let them use the relic. I let them silence her, your wife. And every day since, I've carried that sin. Hughes crouched before him, his anger tempered by the raw pain in the monk's eyes. You want to atone? Then help me. Tell me everything, about the relic, about Hale, about the ministry's plans. Let Laura's death mean something. Aloy looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. There's a hidden chamber beneath the chapel, he said hoarsely. It holds records, evidence of the relic's use, the ministry's manipulation, and the names of those who conspired to kill her. Take them. Expose the truth. Hughes reached out a hand to help Aloy stand, but the monk shook his head. I can't leave this place, Detective. I am bound to the Abbey, to the relic. It is my penance. Before Hughes could protest, Aloy pressed the silver cross into his hand. Go, he urged. Do what I could not. Bring them to justice. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor, Hale's enforcers, closing in. Aloy stood and faced the door, his shoulders straight despite his trembling hands. I'll hold them off. You'll need time to escape. Aloy, don't, Hughes began, but the monk silenced him with a sad smile. Go, Aloy repeated. And tell the world what you've seen. Hughes hesitated for only a moment before slipping through a side passage. Behind him, he heard the heavy crash of the chapel doors, followed by shouts and gunfire. He clenched the cross tightly in his hand, silently vowing to honor Aloy's sacrifice. Aloy was broken, he could see that. This confession, though it did nothing to bring Laura back, had given him something. A piece of the puzzle, a final key to understanding how his wife's death had been orchestrated. You can't justify it, Hughes said, his voice low and cold. You can't claim innocence by saying you were just following orders. You had a choice. You always have a choice. Aloy's shoulders slumped, his face drawn in exhaustion. "I know," he whispered. "But I didn't see it then. And now, it's too late." Hughes turned away, the anger and grief swirling inside him, a maelstrom of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He had the truth now. But it was a truth that was as dark and suffocating as the very walls of the abbey around him. The corruption, the betrayal, the murder, it was all connected, all rooted in a system that used faith and power to destroy lives. "I will make sure the world knows the truth," Hughes said, his voice hardening with resolve. "I will make sure they pay for what they've done." Aloy didn't respond. He didn't need to. Hughes had heard enough. The confession, while damning, had only ignited a new fire inside him. The truth was now his weapon, and he would stop at nothing to bring those responsible to justice, even if it meant tearing down everything in his path. The confessions of Brother Aloy still echoed in Hughes's mind as he stood within the cold, shadowed halls of St. Cecilia's Abbey. The monk's trembling voice, the weight of his guilt, and the knowledge that his wife had been murdered by those he trusted, these things lingered in Hughes's thoughts like a constant, suffocating presence. But there was no time to mourn. Not yet. Hughes's mind raced, and a sense of urgency began to creep in. Aloy had confessed his involvement in the church's dark dealings, but that was only the beginning. Hughes needed to know more about Dr. Hale, about the relic, about everything that had led to Laura's death and the corruption that poisoned the health ministry. He needed to understand the full extent of the web that had ensnared not just Laura, but countless others. "The relic," Hughes said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. His voice was steady, despite the storm raging inside him. "You've told me enough about Dr. Hale and his connection to the relic. But I need to know more. What is its true nature? What does it really do?" Aloy's face flickered with an expression of uncertainty, as though he were unsure whether to reveal more. His eyes flicked to the heavy wooden door at the far end of the room, as if seeking an escape, but there was no turning back now. He had already spoken the unthinkable truths. There was no room left for hesitation. "It's not what you think," Aloy murmured. "It isn't some divine artifact, some blessed relic that bestows power from on high. No, that would be too simple. Too pure." His voice darkened, his words becoming heavy with regret. "The relic is a symbol of absolute authority. Its power doesn't come from the heavens, it comes from the fear and control it inspires. For centuries, it has been used to manipulate, to subjugate." Hughes narrowed his eyes, trying to grasp the depth of Aloy's words. "So, it's not a divine object," Hughes mused, his voice steady. "But what kind of symbol is it? How does it exert its influence?" Aloy took a deep breath and gestured toward the walls of the abbey. His eyes scanned the ancient stone, as if searching for the right words to explain the unexplainable. "It's more than just an object, it's a representation of the church's power. Over time, it has become synonymous with the will of God, and through that association, it has been used to justify decisions that would otherwise be considered unimaginable. The health ministry, the government, Dr. Hale and his colleagues, they all knew that as long as they held the relic, they could invoke its authority. The people would believe that their actions were sanctioned by divine will, that they were doing God's work." Hughes's mind spun as he listened, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to fall into place. The relic wasn't just an artifact, it was a tool of manipulation. It was a means of controlling the masses, of enforcing a system of oppression under the guise of righteousness. And the health ministry had used it to further their own agenda, ensuring their policies were unchallenged and unquestioned. Dr. Hale wanted to consolidate power, to make sure that no one could stand in his way, Aloy continued, his voice taking on a haunted edge. He saw the relic as the key to securing the future of the ministry, to ensuring that his decisions would be seen as the will of God. He believed that the people, the masses, they needed something to cling to, something to believe in. And so he wielded the relic like a weapon, using it to manipulate both the religious and political spheres. Hughes's fingers twitched at his sides, his mind racing with the implications of this new revelation. The relic was not just a symbol, it was a weapon, a means of control. And now, it was tied to the very heart of the conspiracy that had led to Laura's death. He could almost see the invisible strings that connected it all, the health ministry, Dr. Hale, the church, and the dark power of the relic. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated plan to maintain control, to crush dissent, and to keep the masses in a state of unquestioning obedience. There must be more, Hughes pressed, his voice cutting through the silence. If the relic is so crucial to Hale's plans, there must be something more. A way he's using it to enforce his agenda. Aloy looked away, the guilt clearly eating at him. Yes, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. There are writings hidden within the abbey. Cryptic texts, old manuscripts that detail the use of the relic over the centuries. They describe how it was used to justify the church's influence in political matters, how it was invoked in moments of crisis to rally support for decisions that were otherwise unthinkable. Hughes's heart quickened. Where are these writings? He demanded. Tell me, Aloy. I need them. Aloy hesitated for a long moment, his face conflicted. But then, with a resigned sigh, he rose from his seat and gestured toward a narrow passageway at the back of the abbey's main hall. Follow me, he said quietly. The two men walked in silence through the dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the scent of ancient wood and dust. The abbey was a place of reverence, yes, but also one of secrets, secrets that had been hidden away for centuries. Hughes could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as they descended into the lower levels of the abbey, where the true heart of its mysteries lay. At the end of the passageway, Aloy stopped before a heavy, iron-bound door. With a trembling hand, he unlocked it, revealing a small chamber filled with old scrolls and manuscripts. The air in the room was stale, the dust settled thick on the stone floors, but Hughes paid no attention to the surroundings. His eyes were fixed on the texts before him. These are the records, Aloy said softly, his voice filled with reverence and fear. They were hidden here for a reason. They detail the history of the relic, its use, its power, and the role it has played in the dark decisions of the health ministry. Hughes stepped forward, his pulse racing. He could feel the weight of the words before him, the answers he had been seeking buried within these pages. He skimmed through the texts, his sharp mind quickly picking up on the key phrases that spoke of the relic's power, symbol of divine will, the masses must obey, a tool of divine retribution. These were the words that had been used to justify the most atrocious policies of the health ministry, policies that had caused so much suffering, policies that had ultimately led to Laura's death. He flipped through the pages with urgency, his hands trembling slightly as he uncovered more details. The texts described how the relic had been used to legitimize decisions that were otherwise unfathomable, withholding healthcare from the poor, denying life-saving treatments to those deemed unworthy, and using fear of divine punishment to silence dissent. But it was the final text, the one tucked away in the back of the pile, that truly shocked him. It was a detailed account of the consequences for those who defied the relic's authority, consequences that included forced disappearances, fabricated accidents, and, in some cases, murder. Laura's name was mentioned in passing, buried within the text as just another casualty of the system. She had uncovered the truth, had dared to challenge the power of the relic and its bearers. And for that, she had been silenced. Killed in cold blood, made to look like an accident. Hughes's hand clenched around the text, his vision narrowing with a dangerous clarity. He knew what he had to do now. The relic was not just an object of religious veneration, it was a weapon of control, a symbol of a power that had destroyed his life and countless others. And he would bring it all down. The air in the small, dimly lit chamber seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, a palpable tension settling between Hughes and Aloy. The monk's confession had already torn away the layers of mystery that had shrouded the case, revealing the heart of the corruption. But what Aloy was about to say now would cut deeper than anything Hughes had yet encountered. Aloy's eyes flickered with a deep, unbearable sorrow as he watched Hughes peruse the cryptic writings. The last vestiges of resistance within him seemed to dissolve with every word the detective absorbed. Hughes's steady silence only deepened the monk's despair. The overwhelming weight of his sins, his role in Laura's death, his complicity in a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the Abbey's walls, it had all built up to this moment. I've done terrible things, Aloy whispered, the words barely audible as he stepped away from Hughes. His face twisted in agony. I thought I was serving a greater good. That it was all for some higher purpose. But now I see the truth. Hughes looked up from the pages, his eyes narrowing. There was something in the monk's tone, something final, something that suggested Aloy had reached the brink of something irreversible. The detective's voice was low, measured. Brother Aloy, if you want to make amends, there's still time. You can help me bring down Dr. Hale, expose the health ministry's corruption. You can still do the right thing. Aloy's shoulders slumped, and a hollow, broken laugh escaped him. It was not the laugh of a man who found humor in the situation, but one who had resigned himself to an unbearable truth. His hands shook as he grasped the edge of a stone column, as though trying to steady himself against an invisible force threatening to overwhelm him. You don't understand, Aloy said, his voice cracking. I've seen the consequences of defying this system. I've seen the blood on my hands, the lives destroyed. You think Hale will be brought to justice? That this relic will be destroyed? No, Hughes. This power is too deeply entrenched. It's too far-reaching. And his voice faltered. I am no better than the ones who used it. Hughes stepped forward, his expression tight with concern. Brother Aloy, listen to me. You don't have to do this. We can still fight. You can still fight. But Aloy shook his head, his eyes dull, as though all hope had drained from him. There's nothing left to fight for, he whispered. His hand brushed against the old wooden table, where a single silver knife gleamed ominously under the flickering candlelight. I have failed. And now, I must face the consequences of my actions. Before Hughes could react, Aloy moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. The detective's instincts screamed at him to stop, to prevent this tragic act, but it was too late. The monk, consumed by guilt and despair, took the knife and pressed it to his chest with a trembling hand. The sight was so sudden, so shocking, that Hughes stood frozen for a moment, his body locked in a state of paralysis. No! Hughes finally shouted, but the word was torn from his throat too late. Aloy's eyes closed in resignation, and in one swift motion, he ended his life, collapsing to the cold stone floor in an eerie stillness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hughes stood over the fallen monk, his chest tight with disbelief. His mind was a maelstrom, 1,000 thoughts crashing together. How could Aloy, a man so full of remorse, have chosen such an end? Hughes had hoped, desperately hoped, that the monk might find some redemption, some path to redemption. But it seemed that for Aloy, the weight of his sins was too much to bear. The detective's heart thudded in his chest as he knelt beside the monk, his mind still reeling. He couldn't help but wonder, had Aloy truly been beyond saving? Or had the monk's own guilt and the burden of his complicity in Laura's death driven him to the brink of madness? Hughes couldn't say. What was clear, though, was that Aloy's death marked the end of any chance for him to atone. As Hughes moved to examine the body, a strange calmness overcame him. There was no time for mourning. Aloy's confession had given him the clues he needed, and now those clues, the writings hidden within the Abbey's walls, were his only link to understanding Hale's broader plans. But as he searched through the room, his fingers brushing over the cold stone and the tattered manuscripts, he realized the truth: the fight was far from over. It was only just beginning. In the distance, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. Someone must have heard the disturbance. Hughes's pulse quickened, and without a second thought, he gathered the texts in his arms and moved swiftly, silently, toward the exit. Aloy's sacrifice, tragic as it was, had not been in vain. His death had confirmed something Hughes had feared but never fully understood. The power of the relic was not just a matter of belief. It was a weapon, a tool used to enforce a brutal, corrupt system that had ravaged countless lives, including Laura's. As Hughes stepped out into the cold night air, the Abbey's looming stone walls fading into the darkness behind him, a resolve began to solidify within him. The loss of his wife, the loss of Aloy, it all weighed heavily on him, but it also steeled his determination. He would stop Hale. He would dismantle the health ministry's corruption. And he would bring justice for Laura, for Aloy, and for everyone else who had fallen victim to this twisted system. With the Abbey behind him, Hughes made a silent vow. He would not rest until Hale paid for the lives he had destroyed. The soft hum of conversation echoed through the opulent auction house, its polished marble floors and gold-trimmed walls reflecting the carefully curated wealth of the world's elite. The atmosphere was thick with an air of exclusivity, where millionaires and moguls mingled in tuxedos and evening gowns, their laughter sharp but hollow, like brittle glass. Tonight, as always, the auction house stood as a cathedral of excess and ambition, its only altar the items placed beneath the glaring lights of the stage. But tonight, there was something else in the air, a sense of unease, a current of whispered tension that only those who had tasted true power could recognize. Stephen Raul Hughes stood at the threshold, his gaze sharp and unyielding, scanning the room with the practiced precision of a man who had learned to observe every detail. He wasn't here for the art, nor for the spectacle. The crowds, with their extravagant gowns and suits, seemed to blur into one mass of overindulgence. Hughes had come for one thing: the corpse. The painting was placed at the far end of the room, under a soft pool of light that made its grim depiction all the more haunting. The artist's name had long since been forgotten, but the painting itself had become infamous, a macabre symbol of death, a cursed relic passed from one owner to the next, leaving behind a trail of tragedy. No one knew exactly what it depicted: a figure lying in repose, its face half hidden by a veil of shadows, its eyes open but lifeless, staring straight through the viewer with an unsettling gaze. The brushwork was hauntingly beautiful, but there was a sense of sickness to it, as though the canvas had absorbed the sorrow and death that had surrounded it over the years. The story of the painting was as dark as its colors. Whispers followed it wherever it went, of people who had owned it and soon met untimely deaths or were driven to madness. Some said it was a curse, others claimed it was the result of its association with powerful men who wielded influence in dark places. What Hughes knew was that the corpse was more than a mere work of art, it was a key. It was a thread, leading deeper into the heart of the health ministry's corruption, a network of influential figures that had cost Hughes his wife and left him with nothing but a thirst for justice. Tonight, the corpse would be sold to the highest bidder. Hughes could feel the tension, the shifting undercurrent of desperation and greed. The room seemed to hum with anticipation. He had seen this sort of spectacle before, people willing to pay any price for the sake of power, for possession of something that could elevate their status. But to Hughes, it was nothing more than a facade. Beneath the surface, beneath the wealth and the smiles, there was something much darker at play. He adjusted the collar of his coat and moved through the crowd, careful not to draw attention to himself. The patrons barely noticed him, their eyes trained on the auctioneer as he prepared to unveil the painting. Hughes caught glimpses of familiar faces, men whose names were whispered in the highest circles of society, whose ties to the health ministry were well documented. There was no doubt in his mind that they had come for the corpse, not out of any appreciation for art, but for its power. For its connection to the very darkness he was trying to expose. As the auctioneer took his place, his voice booming with practiced enthusiasm, Hughes stood near the back of the room, observing. The auctioneer's words felt hollow, mere background noise against the pounding rhythm of Hughes's heartbeat. He had been tracking the trail of corruption for months now, piecing together the fragments of information from his cases, each clue drawing him closer to the truth of what had happened to Laura. And now, this painting, this cursed relic, was one of the final pieces. The lights flickered as the auctioneer made the announcement, his voice rising with excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we present to you a truly unique masterpiece, a work of art that transcends the boundaries of the canvas. Behold, the corpse, an acquisition that has stirred rumors and legends for years. Its history, its connection to the great and the powerful, and perhaps, a few whispered secrets that some would prefer remain hidden. There was a subtle shift in the room as the auctioneer spoke, and Hughes felt it, a shift in the air. The tension thickened. The eyes of the bidders seemed to sharpen, their gaze moving toward the painting as if they could already sense the power it held. There was a murmur of excitement, but also of fear, a mixture of emotions that Hughes found telling. The painting was more than a mere object of desire, it was a tool, a symbol of the kind of power that men like Dr. Hale could wield, a power that extended into the very lives of ordinary people. Hughes stepped closer to the painting, his eyes never leaving it. He felt an instinctual pull, a darkness he could almost taste in the air. This was no ordinary piece of art, it was a message, a clue, and perhaps even a warning. The connection to Hale and his cronies wasn't merely a suspicion, it was becoming undeniable. Hughes could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, the realization that this was no longer just about solving a case. It was about bringing down an empire built on lies, manipulation, and death. As the auctioneer's gavel raised, signaling the beginning of the bidding, Hughes allowed himself a moment to consider the possibilities. Whoever won tonight would walk away with something that held the key to everything, a piece of history, yes, but also a connection to the ruthless elite that ran the health ministry. And Hughes knew that he couldn't let that happen. He glanced around the room once more, his eyes scanning the crowd for anyone who might be familiar, anyone who might be tied to Hale's network. It wasn't hard to pick out a few faces, men whose wealth and influence had allowed them to thrive in the shadows of society. They didn't know it yet, but their time was running out. Hughes was closing in on the truth, and he wasn't going to let a painting, no matter how cursed, stand in his way. With his resolve hardened, Hughes stepped forward, ready to make his move. This auction wasn't just about buying a painting. It was about buying a future, and Hughes intended to ensure that the future belonged to justice, not to those who had stained it with blood. Hughes stepped into the dimly lit office of Eleanor Grant, a former art dealer whose once esteemed reputation had crumbled into a shadow of what it had been. The air was thick with the smell of dust and stale smoke, the cluttered shelves lined with forgotten canvases and tarnished sculptures. Eleanor herself sat hunched at a desk, her frail hands trembling as she nervously rearranged stacks of paper. Her face, once striking in its youth, was now drawn and worn, marred by years of regret and desperation. The life she had once led, one of luxury and influence, had been consumed by her association with men like Hale. Hughes watched her for a moment before speaking, his voice low and steady. "Eleanor Grant. I've heard the rumors. I'm sure you know why I'm here." Eleanor's gaze flickered up to meet his, and for a moment, there was a flicker of recognition, then a brief flash of fear. She had been expecting him, or perhaps someone like him. After all, the wreckage of her life was no secret to the underworld she had once inhabited. She swallowed, her throat dry. "You want to know about the corpse?" Hughes didn't respond immediately. He let the weight of the silence press on her. It was a tactic he'd learned over the years. Silence made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people tended to reveal more than they meant to. Eleanor finally nodded, her lips trembling. I didn't know what I was getting into when I first encountered that painting. It was just another piece, just another high-priced artifact to peddle to the rich. But when I sold it to that collector, everything changed." She leaned back in her chair, her hands clasping together in a nervous gesture as if trying to hold herself together. The first few months after the sale, nothing seemed off. The collector, he was a quiet man, reclusive. He never showed his face in public, never attended any of the gala events I invited him to. But after he took the painting, I started hearing stories. People started dying. It wasn't just the typical accidents or misfortunes. These were strange disappearances, suicides. People I knew, people who'd been in my circles, gone just like that. Hughes leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he caught her slip. "And you didn't question it? You just kept selling?" Eleanor flinched, her eyes darting to the window as if the very thought of those days brought a fresh wave of panic. "I didn't know, not at first. But then I found out. I started seeing the pattern. Every person who came into contact with that painting, whether they bought it or just admired it, seemed to fall victim to a curse. That's when I realized it wasn't just a piece of art. It was a tool. A weapon. Used by whom?" Hughes asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though every syllable carried the weight of a pressing demand. Her gaze dropped to the floor, as though the shame of what she had done was too much to bear. "Hale. Dr. Hale. He was the one who manipulated everything. He used the painting to keep people in line, to keep them from talking, from exposing his corruption. I didn't know how deep it went. But I knew enough to be terrified. Hughes stood silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Hale's influence was far-reaching, but this, using a cursed painting as a tool for control, was something even Hughes hadn't anticipated. Yet, as he listened, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The painting was no longer just a symbol of death, it was a vessel, a means to manipulate, to instill fear in those who were close enough to be dangerous. And Hale had used it with a chilling precision. But that's not all, is it? Hughes pressed, his voice now cold and direct. You're still hiding something. Eleanor's eyes flashed with something darker now, a mix of guilt, fear, and something even more profound. She glanced around the room, her eyes darting to the shadows as though expecting someone to burst in at any moment. She whispered, barely audible, "Lamont. My lover." He knew too much. He was going to expose Hale. I tried to warn him, I tried to tell him to stay away, but he wouldn't listen. Hughes's pulse quickened as he leaned in. What happened to him? Eleanor's lips trembled as she inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. I was forced to do it. Hale made me. He gave me no choice. Lamont knew about his illegal dealings, the money laundering, the trafficking. Hale couldn't let it slip out. Not when things were so close to being perfect. And so, her voice broke, and she paused as if the very words threatened to strangle her. I had to stage his death. I made it look like he had died in a car accident, but it wasn't an accident. It wasn't even his choice. He was murdered. Hughes's eyes narrowed as the pieces began to align. Lamont's death wasn't just a casualty of a failed relationship. It was part of the greater conspiracy, a calculated move to silence anyone who could threaten Hale's control. Eleanor had been swept into it, trapped in the web of corruption that stretched far beyond what she had ever imagined. Why didn't you come forward? Hughes asked, his voice low but intense. Why didn't you expose Hale? Eleanor closed her eyes, her hands shaking violently now. I couldn't. You don't understand, Hughes. Hale has people everywhere. He's untouchable. He made sure I knew that if I ever spoke out, if I ever told anyone the truth about Lamont, about the painting, about anything, I would be next. He controlled everything, the art world, the black market, even the politicians who could protect him. I was just a small part of his empire, and the moment I tried to escape, I was no longer just Eleanor Grant. I was a liability. And if I talk, I'll be dead too. Hughes took a step back, considering her words carefully. The depth of her entanglement was undeniable, but so too was the fear that still gripped her. She had been used, manipulated, just as countless others had. Her desperation, her broken spirit, it was all the consequence of Hale's ruthless quest for control. You don't have to do anything else, Hughes said quietly, his voice calm but firm. But you have to help me. I need to know everything. I need to know where Hale is, where this network extends. If we don't stop him now, more people will die. More people like Lamont. Like my wife. Eleanor's eyes finally met his, and for the first time, they weren't filled with fear, but something else, something akin to hope. I don't know where he is, but I know how he works. I know how to find the things he's hidden. You're right. He's untouchable, but maybe, just maybe, you can get to him. You can make him pay. Her words were a whisper, but they carried the weight of something far more significant than anything she had said before. The room was silent for a long moment as Hughes processed everything she had revealed. He was closer now. Closer to Hale. Closer to the truth about his wife's death. The puzzle was almost complete. Hughes looked at Eleanor one last time. "Thank you." And as he turned to leave, the door creaking softly behind him, he knew that the path ahead would be far from easy. Hale was a formidable enemy, and Hughes would have to move carefully, relentlessly, to bring him down. But now, at least, he had a direction. He wasn't just hunting shadows anymore. He was hunting a man. A man who would not get away with this. The relentless ticking of the clock echoed in Hughes's mind as he reviewed the scant clues Eleanor had provided. Lamont, once a man of conviction and intellect, now lived in the shadows, hiding from Hale's insidious reach. Eleanor had given him little to go on, just a few cryptic hints about a secluded neighborhood, a place where the ghosts of the past were buried and where Lamont had taken refuge after his life was upended. Eleanor's fear was palpable when she spoke of Lamont's fate. "He's hiding in plain sight, Hughes. But if Hale finds out..." Hughes had seen enough fear in his life to recognize it for what it was: real, raw, and debilitating. And yet, it was that same fear that pushed him forward. The truth, however dangerous, was something that had to be uncovered. Hale's network needed to be exposed, and the only way to do that was by finding Lamont. After days of searching, Hughes found himself in a decaying part of the city, where the streets narrowed and the buildings seemed to press in like silent witnesses to a long-forgotten crime. The houses here were old, their paint chipped and windows dark. It was a place that time had passed by, and those who lived there had either retreated from the world or were hiding from it. This was where Lamont had disappeared to, an existence in the margins, a man who had slipped through Hale's grasp only by disappearing entirely. Hughes walked the streets, his eyes scanning every face, every shadow. There were no signs of life, just the occasional flicker of movement in the distance. He knew that Lamont wouldn't be easy to find. After all, a man who had been forced into hiding by a powerful man like Hale wouldn't just leave traces behind. But Hughes had been in pursuit of the truth for long enough to recognize when he was close. And this felt close. He approached the last house on the left, an old Victorian that seemed to stand alone, as though trying to keep its distance from the rest of the decaying neighborhood. The garden was overgrown, and the windows were shrouded with thick curtains. But there was something in the way the door was ajar, just slightly enough to suggest that someone was waiting inside. Hughes knocked once, then twice, before the door creaked open. A man appeared in the doorway, his face drawn, eyes wide with paranoia. "Lamont. Are you Lamont?" Hughes asked, his voice steady despite the tension that twisted in his gut. The man in front of him seemed to shrink back, as if the mere mention of his name had set off an alarm in his mind. His eyes darted around, making sure no one was watching. His skin was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the doorframe. The life Hughes had once known him for, the strong, confident man, was gone, replaced by a broken figure on the run. Lamont's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough. "You're Hughes, aren't you? You've come for the truth." Hughes nodded. "Yes, I've come to get the truth. But I'm not here for your safety. I'm here to expose Hale." Lamont's face contorted in a mixture of fear and defiance. "You have no idea what Hale's capable of. If you think you can bring him down, if you think you can save me, then you're wrong." He paused, swallowing hard. "I'm as good as dead, Hughes. He'll find me." He always does. Not if we make him believe we're out of reach, Hughes countered, his voice firm. But we need to talk. Everything you know, Lamont. We need to know how deep this goes. You can't hide from the truth forever. Lamont hesitated. His eyes flickered with internal conflict. Then, finally, he stepped aside, letting Hughes into the house. The interior was bare, minimal, the starkness of the place mirroring the life Lamont had been forced to lead in hiding. As Hughes entered, he noticed how the air was heavy with tension, the silence almost suffocating. Lamont led him into a small sitting area, an old leather chair near a dusty window, the only source of light coming from the faint glow outside. The two men sat across from each other, and for a moment, neither spoke. Lamont's eyes were distant, as if trapped in memories he couldn't escape. I thought I could get away from it, Lamont began, his voice cracking. I thought I could run and disappear. But it's not that easy. Hale, he has eyes everywhere. He'll find me, no matter where I go. You don't understand the kind of man he is. Hughes leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. I understand enough. And I understand that if we don't do something now, it will be too late for everyone. People are dying, Lamont. People who've crossed Hale, people like your lover, Eleanor's lover, and my wife. We're all connected in this web of corruption. Lamont's eyes flickered to the door, then back to Hughes. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. I didn't know it would come to this. I was in love with Eleanor, and we tried to get out, tried to escape Hale's clutches. But then he found out. He made me a part of his network. He made me do things I can never undo. The silence between them deepened as Hughes processed his words. Lamont had been part of it all along, a man ensnared by the same monster Hughes had been hunting for so long. And then, before Hughes could speak again, the door slammed open with terrifying force. A figure rushed in, a man clad in black, his face obscured by a mask. Without warning, he raised a gun, firing twice. The first shot hit Lamont in the chest, and the second grazed Hughes's arm as he dived for cover. Hughes's heart raced as he crawled behind the couch, his mind spinning with disbelief. Lamont, still conscious, tried to speak, but the words were lost in a choking cough. Lamont! Hughes shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. But it was too late. Lamont's eyes glazed over, his body slumping to the floor in a final, tragic collapse. The gunman turned and fled, leaving the house as quickly as he had entered, disappearing into the shadows. Hughes's heart pounded as he watched the life drain from Lamont's eyes. He could feel the weight of the moment, one more death on the long list of victims Hale had claimed. But there was no time to grieve. Hughes staggered to his feet, his arm throbbing from the wound, and rushed out the door. As he fled into the night, the full gravity of what had just happened sank in. Lamont had been their last chance to truly expose Hale's operation, and now he was gone. Hughes had barely escaped with his life, but the hunt was far from over. In the depths of his mind, Hughes knew one thing for certain: Hale would pay. No matter the cost, he would make sure of it. The truth could not die with Lamont. The news of Lamont's brutal murder weighed heavily on Eleanor Grant. The once proud art dealer, who had once walked the fine line between wealth and scandal, now found herself adrift in a sea of grief, fear, and helplessness. With Lamont gone, she had lost more than just a lover. She had lost the last shred of hope for redemption, the last thread that had connected her to any kind of future. She had tried, with all her might, to escape the web Hale had spun around her. But it had always been a futile attempt. Her involvement in Hale's schemes was too deep, and every step she took toward freedom seemed to lead her back to him. The past was an unforgiving shadow, and it would always find her, no matter how far she ran. Now, with Lamont's death, Eleanor knew it was only a matter of time before Hale came for her too. She had no illusions left. She was a marked woman. There was no one left to protect her, and no place left to hide. In the silence of her private gallery, surrounded by the lavish works of art she had once dealt in, Eleanor's mind unraveled. The walls that had once been filled with beauty and intrigue now seemed to close in on her. But one particular piece, the cursed painting known as the corpse, was the most ominous. It had always been the one that haunted her, the one that had brought nothing but destruction into her life. It was a symbol of the evil that Hale had controlled, a constant reminder of her complicity. Eleanor stood in front of the painting, the ornate frame casting a long shadow on the cold marble floor. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now clouded with anguish. She could feel the weight of everything she had lost, the people, the choices, the innocent lives destroyed by Hale's machinations. The painting before her was both the cause and the result of it all. She had once sold it, unknowingly setting off a chain of events that had brought tragedy into so many lives. And now, it seemed, it was the last symbol of her entrapment. In a final, desperate act of defiance, Eleanor grabbed a knife from a nearby display case, her fingers trembling as she gripped the handle. The tears she had been holding back threatened to spill over as she approached the corpse. She could feel the weight of the knife, heavy in her hand, as if it were an extension of her pain. With one swift motion, she slashed at the painting's surface. The canvas gave way with a sickening tear, the once stunning image now marred by the brutal cuts. The blood-red streaks from the canvas seemed to mirror the bloodshed she had witnessed in her life, and with each slash, she felt a small, fleeting release. But even in the act of destruction, Eleanor knew that it was too late to undo the damage she had done. Her rage consumed her as she attacked the painting with reckless abandon, her arms moving in frenzied arcs, the knife biting into the artwork with each strike. The once beautiful face of the corpse became an abstract jumble of colors and cuts, the features she had once admired now erased. And then, just as she prepared to strike once more, the knife hit something solid in the back of the painting. The force of the blow splintered the frame, and Eleanor stumbled back, gasping for breath. She turned the painting over, revealing the hidden compartment at the back. Her hands shook as she pried it open, her eyes locking onto a single, crumpled piece of paper. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it, revealing a hastily scrawled address, a location that, if true, could lead Hughes to the heart of Hale's operation. The address was brief, almost cryptic, but Eleanor recognized its significance. It was the key that Hughes had been searching for. Hale's operations headquarters. The heart of the corruption. The place where all the strings had been pulled. The place where Hughes might finally find the answers he had been seeking. But even as she stared at the address, Eleanor knew that her time was running out. She had no illusions about surviving this. Hale would find her, and she would pay the price for her betrayal. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she gazed at the piece of paper. It was her final act, her final attempt to do something right. To make up for the lives she had ruined, the people she had betrayed. She had spent too many years in service to Hale, too many years of complicity and silence. But now, as she faced her own inevitable end, she had one last chance to atone. With the address clutched tightly in her hand, Eleanor took one last, mournful glance at the corpse. Her fingers brushed against the torn canvas, the reality of her decision settling in like a cold weight in her chest. She had no idea how much time she had left, but she knew that she had done all she could. She had given Hughes the key to bringing down Hale. Whether or not he could use it was another matter entirely. As she turned to leave, the door to the gallery swung open. Eleanor froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The shadows in the hallway grew darker, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps reached her ears. The inevitable had arrived. Without a word, she turned back to the gallery, racing to destroy any evidence of what had just transpired. The address, however, was safe in her pocket. Her final gift to Hughes, the man who might be able to end this nightmare once and for all. But Eleanor was not given the time to escape. Before she could reach the back door, a figure appeared in the doorway, a silhouette that could only be Hale's. His presence filled the room like a suffocating fog, and his voice, cold and commanding, echoed through the gallery. "Eleanor, you didn't think you could run from me, did you?" The last thing Eleanor saw before everything went black was Hale's face, his cold, calculating smile, the smile of a man who knew he had already won. Hughes stood amidst the wreckage of Eleanor's gallery, the smell of paint and splintered wood mingling with the thick air of loss. The corpse, now a little more than a torn and destroyed canvas, lay in fragmented pieces around him. It was as if the act of destruction had torn away the veil of the mystery he had been chasing for so long, leaving him exposed to something far darker. But one thing remained intact, a small piece of paper clutched in his hand. The address, hastily scrawled, was now his only guide to unraveling the rest of Hale's operation. It was everything he had been working toward, every lead, every dead end, every whisper of the conspiracy, all condensed into this single clue. Hughes felt the weight of it, this scrap of paper, this final hope that Eleanor had left him. It was a fragile thing, but it had the power to change everything. And yet, the victory felt hollow. His mind drifted to Lamont, the man who had agreed to help him and then had been snatched away so cruelly. He could still hear the echoes of that brutal murder in the alleyway, the desperation in Lamont's eyes as he had tried to make sense of the world that had conspired against him. Then there was Eleanor, broken, fearful, destroyed by the very system she had once served. She had been willing to give him the truth, had laid the path for him to bring Hale to justice, but in the end, she had been consumed by fear, hiding from the very thing that had ruined her life. The thought of what had happened to her gnawed at him, a feeling of deep sorrow mixed with the bitterness of his own helplessness. Hughes knew he was playing a dangerous game, one that would demand more from him than he was willing to give. Each step forward took him deeper into the web of corruption Hale had woven. Each clue he uncovered only seemed to reveal more questions, more faces hidden behind masks of power. How many others had been consumed by Hale's reach? How many lives had been torn apart by the man's thirst for control? The weight of it all pressed down on him, the burden of responsibility growing heavier with each passing moment. Hughes could feel the walls closing in. He had no illusions about what lay ahead. The path to Hale's inner sanctum was fraught with danger, and the closer he got, the more likely it was that he would become a target himself. But there was no turning back now. He carefully folded the piece of paper and tucked it into his coat pocket. The gallery's wreckage seemed to mock him, the broken pieces of the corpse scattered like the shattered lives of everyone involved in this mess. He stood there for a moment longer, allowing himself the briefest of pauses to collect his thoughts. Then, with determination setting in, Hughes turned and made his way toward the exit. The game was changing. This wasn't just about a painting, or even about the people involved. It was about something much bigger, something more insidious. Hale's corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Hughes could feel the noose tightening around him as he stepped into the unknown, but there was no turning back. As he left the gallery behind, the streets felt colder, darker. His mind was fixed on one thing: the address. It was his next step, his only chance to expose the truth. The realization dawned on him that this was just the beginning. Hale's network was vast, and each layer he peeled back revealed an even more dangerous game. Hughes had known it wouldn't be easy, but he had never expected it to be this treacherous. Still, he pressed on. The darkness seemed to stretch on ahead, with Hale's operations waiting at the end, like a hidden serpent ready to strike. Hughes had to move quickly, or risk being swallowed up by the very system he was trying to dismantle. The stakes had never been higher, and yet, with the same determination that had carried him this far, Hughes knew there was no other choice. Stephen Raul Hughes stood at the entrance of the decaying warehouse, the weight of the moment pressing on him like an unseen hand. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke, lingering from years of neglect and fire damage. The warehouse loomed before him, a silent monument to a past buried under layers of dust and secrecy. Once a bustling hub of industry, it was now a hollow shell, its rusted doors creaking with every gust of wind as though mourning its forgotten purpose. Despite its decrepit appearance, Hughes knew that this was no random location. He had followed a trail here, subtle, almost imperceptible clues that had led him deeper into Hale's web of corruption. The addresses, the cryptic references in Eleanor Grant's hastily scrawled note, all pointed to this forsaken place. There were no signs of activity, no guards or surveillance cameras, just the creeping sensation that something significant had once been hidden here. The weight of that secrecy settled in his bones, and Hughes instinctively reached for the revolver tucked under his coat, knowing full well that this investigation would cost him more than just the pursuit of truth. With a deliberate movement, Hughes pushed open the rusted doors. They groaned under the strain, the sound reverberating like a warning in the otherwise silent night. Inside, the warehouse was shrouded in darkness, the dim light of a nearby street lamp casting long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. The air was stagnant, thick with the remnants of mold and decay. Forgotten machinery loomed like ghosts of a bygone era, rusted and unused, their once gleaming surfaces now dull and scarred. Hughes stepped inside, his shoes crunching against the debris as he surveyed the space. The room was large and cavernous, filled with remnants of a time long past. Steel beams crisscrossed overhead, their surfaces tarnished and worn. He moved cautiously, every sense alert. His sharp instincts, honed from years of investigating the darkest corners of society, guided him through the labyrinth of old crates and machinery. His mind raced through the details of his investigation, each thread that had brought him here. The connection between the painting, the corpse, Eleanor's fractured story, and the elusive figure of Hale. All seemed to converge on this place. Hale's operation, so carefully concealed in the shadows, had left a trail of broken lives in its wake. Hughes couldn't shake the feeling that the records of Hale's empire lay within these walls, hidden somewhere in this forgotten warehouse. As he ventured deeper into the building, the darkness seemed to close in around him, making each step feel heavier, more deliberate. His eyes adjusted to the gloom, and it wasn't long before he spotted the first sign of something more, something intentionally concealed. A steel door, half obscured by shadows, stood at the far end of the warehouse. It was different from the other entrances, more fortified, more deliberate in its design. The edges were marked with scuff marks, as though it had been opened and closed many times in the past. Hughes approached the door cautiously, his pulse quickening. This was it, the vault. The impenetrable stronghold where Hale's secrets were likely kept under lock and key. He reached for the handle, turning it slowly, the sound of metal grinding against metal reverberating in the stillness. The door creaked open with an agonizing slowness, revealing the dark interior beyond. The space inside was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the decaying chaos of the warehouse. Shelves lined the walls, filled with rows of files and boxes, meticulously organized. There was no mistaking it now, this was Hale's hidden operation, the heart of the corruption that had spiraled out of control. This was where the records of the health ministry's darkest deeds were stored, away from prying eyes. Hughes felt the weight of the discovery settle in his chest. He stepped inside, carefully scanning the room. The air felt heavy, charged with the unspoken truth that lay within these walls. Hughes knew that the answers to his questions, the key to bringing Hale down, were somewhere in this room. But as he began to sift through the files, a creeping sense of unease washed over him. He could feel eyes watching him, though he saw no one. The silence was oppressive, as though the warehouse itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Hughes pushed aside the growing tension and focused on the task at hand. He started with the top shelf, flipping through old records with practiced precision. As he moved from one file to another, the reality of what he was uncovering began to sink in. The records were far more extensive than he had imagined, spanning years of corruption, manipulation, and deceit. Hale's influence had infiltrated every corner of the health ministry, every aspect of the government, all hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and smoke and mirrors. But it was one particular document, buried at the back of the shelf, that made his heart stop. It was a ledger, old and worn, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was familiar, unmistakable. It was Hale's. With trembling hands, Hughes opened the ledger, scanning the contents. The entries were cryptic at first, names, dates, numbers, but as he read on, the picture began to form. Hale's network wasn't just about controlling the health ministry, it was about manipulating entire systems, governments, and individuals, using the relic and the power it bestowed to coerce and control. The ledger outlined a trail of political assassinations, blackmail, and bribes, all tied back to a single, elusive goal: control of the nation's health policies, and the wealth that came with it. Hughes's mind raced as he absorbed the scope of what he was reading. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just a rogue group within the ministry, it was an organized network with its roots extending into the highest levels of power. And at the center of it all was Hale, the man who had orchestrated it all with chilling precision. The sound of footsteps in the distance broke Hughes's concentration. He froze, the ledger still open in his hands. He hadn't heard anyone approach. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he quickly shoved the ledger into his coat pocket, drawing his revolver. He moved quietly toward the door, his senses on high alert. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Hughes's heart pounded in his chest as he edged closer to the doorway, peering through a small crack in the steel. What he saw made his blood run cold. A shadowy figure, cloaked in darkness, moved swiftly toward the vault. He had no idea who it was, but they were coming for the same thing. And they were not alone. Hughes's pulse quickened. He had to get out, he couldn't let them find him with the ledger. With one final glance at the room, Hughes slipped back into the shadows, silently making his way toward an exit, his heart racing with the knowledge that Hale's empire was far more dangerous and far more expansive than he could have ever imagined. The hunt was no longer just about exposing corruption. It had become a fight for survival. The dim light from Hughes's flashlight flickered uneasily as he stepped deeper into the vault, the cold air pressing down on him like a weight. The smell of decay and the faint scent of smoke hung thick in the air, a testament to the fire that had ravaged this place long ago. Hale's efforts to destroy the evidence had been thorough, but not perfect. The charred remnants of documents, some reduced to ash, others barely recognizable, lay scattered across the floor, half hidden in the shadows. Hughes moved cautiously through the room, his boots crunching on the brittle remains of burned paper. He could feel the heat of the fire still clinging to the walls, the echoes of the destruction that had been wrought here. The sheer effort it must have taken to erase his tracks sent a shiver down his spine. Whoever Hale was, whatever power he commanded, it was clear that Hughes wasn't dealing with a mere corrupt official. This was a man who would go to any lengths to protect his empire, no matter how many lives he destroyed in the process. As Hughes swept the flashlight across the room, his eyes caught a glimpse of something that stood out from the devastation, a partially intact ledger. It was tucked away in a far corner, hidden behind a pile of burned paperwork. The edges of the book were singed, the pages browned and curled at the corners, but it was still legible. A strange sense of anticipation filled Hughes as he crossed the room and reached for the ledger. His fingers hovered over the scorched surface for a moment before he opened it, the brittle pages cracking slightly as he flipped them over. The entries inside were a jumble of names, dates, and figures, each more cryptic than the last. But as Hughes moved through the pages, his sharp eyes caught something that made his breath catch in his throat. The ledger contained Laura's final investigation. Hughes's heart pounded in his chest as he read. The carefully scrawled notes were familiar, her handwriting, her meticulous style, the sharp observations she'd made in the months before her death. As Hughes read deeper, the pieces began to fall into place. Laura had uncovered the health ministry's dark secrets long before her death, secrets that reached far beyond the corruption he had initially suspected. The pages told of illegal experiments, human trials conducted without consent, and a vast network of financial fraud. Vulnerable populations, orphans, the elderly, immigrants, had been targeted, used as guinea pigs in experiments designed to enrich those in power. The health ministry, under Hale's control, had been systematically manipulating the system for years, withholding medical care from those deemed unworthy while funneling enormous sums of money into private accounts. Hughes could feel the rage building inside him as he read about the lives that had been destroyed, the countless victims who had suffered at the hands of Hale and his operatives. But it was the final entry that sent a chill through Hughes. Laura had discovered it all. The full extent of the conspiracy, the links between the health ministry, the church, and the wealthy elites, all connected through the relic and the power it afforded them. The experiments were part of a larger plan, one to control the population, to eliminate anyone deemed an obstacle to their control. But what was most damning was Laura's discovery that Hale had been orchestrating the entire operation from behind the scenes. Her death, Hughes now understood, had not been a random accident. It had been a calculated cover-up. Hale, in his desperate need to protect his empire, had arranged for Laura to be silenced, just as he had done with so many others before her. Hughes's hands tightened around the ledger as the realization settled him like a cold weight in his chest. His wife had been murdered to keep the truth hidden, to prevent her from exposing the full depth of Hale's corruption. Hughes's mind raced. He had always known that Laura's death wasn't an accident, but this was confirmation, the evidence he had long sought, the proof that would bring Hale down. But as he continued to read, the full scale of what Laura had uncovered became clearer. She had been close, so close to bringing it all to light. If she had lived just a little longer, perhaps she would have succeeded. The weight of her sacrifice pressed down on him. Laura had been willing to risk everything to expose the truth, and now Hughes understood that her death wasn't just the loss of his wife, it was a deliberate attempt to extinguish the light of truth. Hale had orchestrated her death to protect his empire, but in doing so, he had made a mistake. He had left behind a trail that Hughes could now follow, a trail that led straight to Hale's heart. But there was more to this ledger, more pieces to the puzzle. The final pages detailed the efforts Hale had made to destroy any evidence of his wrongdoing. He had used the relic to manipulate key players in the government, silencing those who would have stood against him. The ledger confirmed what Hughes had suspected all along. The relic was no mere artifact. It was a tool of control, a symbol of the power Hale wielded over the corrupt elite who enabled him. Hughes's fingers trembled as he turned the last few pages. Each one was a revelation, a deeper dive into the extent of Hale's influence, his manipulation, and his ruthlessness. But there was something else hidden in the final pages, a list of names. A directory of people who had been part of the operation, people who had helped carry out the atrocities. It was a list of potential allies, informants, and, most importantly, enemies. Hughes knew that the time for investigation was over. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth, it was about bringing Hale to justice. The ledger had given him the final pieces of the puzzle, the proof he needed to expose Hale's corruption to the world. But there was one more thing he needed to do. He needed to find the rest of the records, the ones Hale had hidden away, and burn them to the ground. The sound of footsteps outside the vault snapped Hughes back to reality. His heart raced as he quickly shoved the ledger into his coat pocket, glancing around for an escape route. The warehouse was silent once more, but the danger was far from over. Hale's men were closing in, and Hughes was the last person standing between them and the truth. With a steadying breath, Hughes moved toward the back of the vault. He couldn't let Hale get away. Not now. Not after everything he had uncovered. The hunt was on, and this time, Hughes wouldn't stop until Hale paid for his sins. The weight of the ledger in Hughes's coat pocket was a constant reminder of the magnitude of what he had just uncovered. The details of Laura's investigation, the damning evidence against Hale, all of it flashed through his mind as he carefully examined the scorched remnants of the vault. But even in his moment of triumph, Hughes couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The sense of danger hung in the air like a thick fog, pressing in on him from all sides. Then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. The tall, hulking man emerged from the darkness of the warehouse, his presence as imposing as the storm clouds gathering outside. He was a brute of a man, his broad shoulders and powerful frame suggesting that he had been built for one thing, violence. His face was expressionless, his cold eyes fixed on Hughes with a detached intensity. There was no question about who this was. This was Hale's enforcer, the man who made sure the secrets of the vault stayed buried, and anyone who threatened that secrecy met a brutal end. Hughes's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm, but he knew it would be useless in this fight. The enforcer wasn't a man to be taken down with a quick shot or a clever maneuver. This would be a battle of strength, will, and endurance. Hughes had to be quick, resourceful, and relentless. The enforcer's lip curled into a thin, predatory smile as he stepped closer, his boots making a hollow sound as they struck the concrete floor. The atmosphere between them was electric, thick with the promise of violence. The enforcer wasn't here to talk. He was here to silence Hughes and ensure that the secrets of the health ministry, and Hale's corruption, remained hidden. Without a word, the enforcer lunged forward, his fists like wrecking balls aimed straight at Hughes's head. Hughes barely managed to dodge, the rush of air from the enforcer's punch grazing his cheek. The force of the missed blow sent a shudder through the warehouse, the walls seeming to tremble under the weight of the man's raw power. Hughes retaliated swiftly, aiming a kick to the enforcer's ribs, but the brute absorbed the blow without flinching. His movements were like a machine, precise and devastating. He grabbed Hughes by the wrist, twisting it violently, forcing Hughes to release his hold on the ledger. The enforcer's grip was like iron, and Hughes could feel the blood rushing from his hand as he fought to break free. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. The enforcer's cold gaze locked onto Hughes, and for a brief instant, Hughes felt the weight of the man's indifference, the lack of any compassion or hesitation. This wasn't a fight between equals. This was a predator hunting its prey. But Hughes wasn't about to give up. With a grunt of effort, Hughes twisted his body, using the enforcer's momentary lapse in focus to his advantage. He planted his foot against the man's knee and shoved with all his might, sending the enforcer stumbling backward. Hughes didn't hesitate. He threw a series of rapid punches to the enforcer's jaw, each one landing with a satisfying crunch. But the enforcer merely grunted and absorbed the blows, his face barely shifting in response. The warehouse filled with the sounds of their brutal clash, fists pounding against flesh, bones cracking under the sheer force of their strikes. Hughes's body ached with every punch, but he refused to relent. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. It was about the lives that had been ruined by Hale and the health ministry's corruption. And it was about Laura, the woman he had loved and lost. He couldn't afford to fail now. The enforcer roared, a primal sound that echoed through the warehouse, and lunged once more. Hughes ducked beneath the man's swinging arm, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow that would have taken his head off. He darted toward a stack of metal crates, using the cover to reposition himself. The enforcer wasn't far behind, crashing into the crates with a loud bang, sending debris flying across the room. The two men circled each other, each looking for an opening, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. Hughes knew he couldn't sustain this level of combat for long. The enforcer was stronger, faster, and relentless. But Hughes had something the enforcer didn't: strategy. Every move he made had a purpose. Every step was calculated, and every strike aimed to weaken his opponent, to wear him down. Hughes launched himself at the enforcer again, this time aiming for the man's exposed side. He connected with a brutal elbow to the ribs, feeling the crack of bone beneath his strike. The enforcer grunted in pain but retaliated with a backhand that sent Hughes flying across the floor, slamming into a steel column. Dazed but determined, Hughes struggled to his feet, his body battered and bruised. Blood dripped from his lip, and his vision swam, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Hale was counting on his enforcer to finish the job. But Hughes had come too far to die here, in this forsaken warehouse, with the truth just within his grasp. The enforcer advanced, slow and methodical, like a lion stalking its prey. He was sure now that he had the upper hand, and Hughes could see the cruel satisfaction in his eyes. The man was confident that the end was near. But Hughes wasn't done yet. He feigned a stumble, letting himself fall to the ground as if completely spent. The enforcer moved in, his foot raised to deliver the final blow, but that was exactly what Hughes had been waiting for. In a blur of motion, Hughes sprang upward, catching the enforcer's ankle and pulling him off balance. The man crashed to the ground with a thunderous thud, and Hughes was on him in an instant. Using the last of his strength, Hughes delivered a brutal series of blows to the enforcer's face, each one landing with the force of a hammer. The enforcer roared in pain, but Hughes didn't stop. He couldn't stop. This fight wasn't just about him, it was about everything he had lost, everything he had come here to uncover. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the enforcer's resistance began to wane. His movements slowed, his eyes losing their cold, calculating focus. Hughes didn't relent until the man lay motionless beneath him, bloodied and broken. Panting, Hughes stood over the fallen enforcer, his body trembling from the intensity of the fight. Every muscle screamed in pain, but the adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him moving. He glanced at the ledger tucked securely in his coat pocket, the weight of the truth it contained settling heavily on his shoulders. The enforcer was down, but the war wasn't over. Hale was still out there, and Hughes was getting closer to him with every step. The truth was within his reach, and he wouldn't stop until Hale paid for the suffering he had caused. With one last look at the enforcer's prone form, Hughes turned and made his way toward the exit, the faint echo of his footsteps the only sound in the quiet aftermath of the fight. This was just the beginning. The warehouse was still, save for the labored breaths of two men, each battered and bruised, their bodies soaked in sweat and blood. The flickering lights above cast long shadows, giving the room an eerie, almost surreal quality. Hughes stood over the enforcer, the man's body sprawled out like a broken puppet, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Hughes's knuckles were raw, his fists aching from the brutal exchanges they'd just endured. Every inch of his body screamed in pain, but he had pushed through it. He had no choice. There was too much at stake. The ledger, the final proof of Hale's monstrous corruption, was still in his possession. And with it, Hughes had the power to bring down the man who had orchestrated his wife's death. But just as Hughes started to catch his breath, the enforcer's hand shot up, grabbing his ankle with surprising strength. Hughes froze, a chill creeping up his spine as the man's bloodshot eyes met his with a final, haunting clarity. Hale doesn't lose, the enforcer rasped, his voice low and gravely, as though each word was being torn from him. He lets you think you've won. Hughes's heart skipped a beat. The words cut through him like a knife, chilling him to the bone. He had known, deep down, that this wasn't over. Hale was too entrenched, too powerful. He had a network that stretched far and wide, and Hughes had just scraped the surface. The enforcer's grip loosened as his eyes began to fade, the light of consciousness slipping away. Hughes watched, still tense, as the man slumped back into unconsciousness, the weight of his warning hanging in the air like a thundercloud. Standing over the fallen enforcer, Hughes felt a knot of unease settle in his stomach. The fight had been long and grueling, but he knew this victory, hard-earned as it was, wouldn't bring him the peace he sought. The battle with Hale was far from over. If anything, it was only beginning. The enforcer's words rang in his ears, a reminder of just how dangerous the corrupt mastermind truly was. Hughes glanced at the ledger, tucked safely in his coat pocket. Laura's name was there. Her investigation, her discovery of the ministry's horrific dealings, was no longer just a tragic memory. It was evidence. And it was enough to bring Hale to justice. But the price was high. Hughes had lost more than just his wife. The corruption he was fighting against had already taken so much from him, and the road ahead would be fraught with danger. If Hale's enforcer was any indication, there would be more battles, more bloodshed before Hughes could truly confront the man behind the corruption. He took a steadying breath, his resolve hardening. Hale might think he had won, might believe his web of influence and terror would shield him forever. But Hughes wasn't going to let that happen. Not now. Not ever. Hughes took one last glance at the fallen enforcer, a silent promise passing between them. He would finish this. He would expose Hale for what he was, no matter the cost. With a final look around the warehouse, its rusting walls, its silent machinery, Hughes turned and made his way toward the exit. The shadows of the night seemed to beckon, but Hughes wasn't afraid. He knew what he had to do. The next step in this war was clear. He would find Hale, wherever he was hiding, and he would make him pay for the lives he had destroyed. The road ahead would be long, but Hughes was ready for it. With every step, he was closer to the truth. And he would stop at nothing to see it revealed. Hughes stood motionless for a moment, his chest heaving with the weight of the fight. The warehouse was silent now, save for the distant hum of a machine somewhere deep within the labyrinth of darkened rooms. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart still pounding from the brutal confrontation. He wiped his brow, his hand trembling as the enforcer's final warning replayed in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. Hale doesn't lose. He lets you think you've won. The words felt like a weight, pressing against his chest, suffocating the fleeting sense of triumph he had felt just moments before. Hughes knew, deep down, that this battle was only a small piece of a far larger and more dangerous war. The enforcer was only the tip of the iceberg. Hale's reach extended far beyond what Hughes had already seen, and no matter how many men he fought or secrets he uncovered, it wouldn't be enough. Hale would always have more, always have a backup plan, always have more blood to spill in order to protect his empire. But Hughes couldn't stop. He wouldn't. Not now, not after everything he had uncovered. His eyes moved to the ledger, now safely tucked in his coat pocket. It was a crucial piece of evidence, a damning record of the health ministry's operations, filled with details of fraud, corruption, and illegal experiments. But it was only one fragment of a much larger puzzle, and Hughes knew that with each revelation, he was being drawn deeper into a web of deceit that threatened to consume everything in its path. His fingers traced the edges of the leather-bound book. Laura had been right. She had been so close to exposing Hale's empire, to unraveling everything. Her death was not an accident. It had been deliberate. Hale had taken her life to silence the truth, to protect his twisted network. And now, Hughes had the proof, the ledger that connected Laura's final investigation to the darkness Hale had spent years hiding. But the bitter truth gnawed at Hughes as he thought of Eleanor, of Lamont, of all those who had fallen along the way. Their deaths, too, were part of Hale's plan to keep his empire standing. Hughes knew he couldn't afford to mourn. There was no time. Not now. Hughes glanced at the fallen enforcer, his body a stark reminder of the brutality Hale was willing to unleash to maintain control. With each victory, the price seemed higher. But Hughes was prepared. He had already lost too much to back down now. Hale's empire was built on the suffering of countless lives, and Hughes was the only one left who could bring it all crashing down. With a deep breath, Hughes forced his mind back to the task at hand. The enforcer's warning had been clear, but it had also steeled his resolve. Hale had underestimated him. He had no idea how far Hughes was willing to go to bring him down. The pieces were falling into place, one by one, and Hughes was ready to follow the trail wherever it led. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The road ahead would be dangerous, but Hughes knew there was no turning back. Hale was out there, somewhere, lurking in the shadows, always a step ahead. But Hughes had something he hadn't had before, an understanding of just how far Hale's corruption went. With the ledger as his guide, Hughes could now track Hale's operations to their source. He could bring the entire network down, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the bitter truth. As he turned to leave the warehouse, Hughes's eyes fell on the door once again, the same rusted entrance that had welcomed him into this dark place. But now, it felt different. It was no longer just an exit, it was the beginning of something bigger. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The battle had only just begun. The one who will rise. The grandeur of the gala was almost overwhelming as Stephen Raul Hughes made his way through the entrance of the opulent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a soft glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests who mingled beneath them. The scent of expensive perfumes, laughter, and the clinking of glasses filled the air, but Hughes couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the polished surface, something much darker was unfolding. The Health Ministry's charity gala, though seemingly a celebration of benevolence, had a far more sinister purpose, one Hughes had uncovered in the pages of the ledger he had fought so hard to retrieve. What was meant to appear as an altruistic event would, in fact, serve as the stage for Hale's final, desperate move to silence any remaining threats to his empire. Hughes scanned the room, his sharp eyes picking out the key players, government officials with tight smiles, media moguls eager to turn a blind eye, and the whispers of the few remaining whistleblowers who had once dared to expose the corruption festering within the ministry's walls. The guest list was littered with names that, though they may not have known it yet, were all targets of Hale's plan. Hale, it seemed, was taking no chances. The charity gala wasn't just a masquerade of generosity, it was a ticking bomb. Hughes's heart quickened as he realized the truth. Hale wasn't just looking to consolidate his power. Tonight, he planned to purge his network of all those who might stand in his way. The influential figures who could expose him, activists, medical professionals, journalists, and politicians, would be caught in the flames of a fire that would wipe out any trace of their existence. And if Hughes didn't act quickly, he would be one of the casualties. In the far corner of the ballroom, Hughes saw Eleanor Grant, the woman who had once been his most valuable ally but had since disappeared into hiding, her fear outweighing her desire for justice. She wasn't the only one who had been silenced by the shadow of Hale's network. There were others here, too, people who had been gathering the pieces of the puzzle, who had come too close to exposing the truth. Their deaths would serve as the final chapter in Hale's web of corruption, a chapter that Hughes knew he had to stop before it was written. He could almost feel the tension in the air, the unspoken awareness among the guests that they were all at the mercy of a man who controlled more than just the ministry. Hale had become a puppeteer, and tonight, the strings were about to snap. The fire would be both literal and symbolic, a purging of truth, a final cleansing to ensure that the world would continue to look the other way while Hale's empire thrived. Hughes's fingers brushed against the cool surface of his wristwatch, a habit he had developed during tense moments like this. He checked the time. Hale's act was imminent. The gala, meant to celebrate philanthropy, would soon devolve into chaos, an inferno designed to erase everything and everyone that might expose the network Hale had worked so hard to protect. With every passing second, Hughes felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. He couldn't allow Hale to succeed, not after everything he had uncovered, not after losing so much. Hughes knew that the fire would be no ordinary blaze. Hale was meticulous, calculating, and this fire would be planned to perfection, its destruction complete. This was no longer just a matter of uncovering corruption, it was about stopping a man whose reach extended far beyond the health ministry, whose power was enough to burn everything in its path. As he moved through the room, Hughes kept his eyes sharp, analyzing every face, every movement. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the sense of foreboding that comes with knowing something terrible is about to unfold. The stakes had never been higher, and the clock was ticking down to the moment when the flames would rise. There was no room for error. Hughes had to act swiftly, before Hale's final purge reduced everything to ash, including the fragile hope that had kept the truth alive. The gala's vibrant noise faded into the background as Raul Hughes navigated the crowd, his mind sharp and focused on one singular goal, finding Hale before the full extent of the man's plans came to fruition. The glistening chandeliers, the laughter of the guests, and the smooth clinking of champagne flutes were nothing more than a veil, a false facade that concealed the corruption festering beneath the surface. Hughes's instincts led him toward a secluded hallway at the back of the ballroom, where he had received word Hale would be making a private appearance. The guests were oblivious to the high-stakes game unfolding just beyond the elegant walls. The dimly lit corridor seemed to pulse with a quiet menace, the walls adorned with portraits of past benefactors of the health ministry, those who, in death, were now mere symbols of Hale's unrelenting control. And then, there he was. Hale stood at the far end of the hallway, an imposing figure dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his features cold and composed. His eyes met Hughes's, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. There was no rush, no tension in Hale's posture. He simply waited, as if fully expecting this confrontation. The calculating calm that radiated from him was unnerving, as if he knew the outcome before the first word was spoken. "Mr. Hughes," Hale said, his voice smooth, almost friendly. "I must admit, I did not expect to see you here tonight. You've proven yourself to be quite the persistent nuisance." Hughes kept his gaze steady. "I didn't come for pleasantries. I came to stop you." A slight, almost imperceptible smile tugged at Hale's lips, but there was no warmth in it. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them with deliberate, measured steps. "Stop me? My dear Mr. Hughes, you've already lost. You simply don't know it yet." The words were cold, but there was a deep conviction behind them. Hale's philosophy was clear in his demeanor. He wasn't just some power-hungry official, he believed in something far more dangerous. "I know about the fire you're planning. The people you intend to erase. You can't just burn away the truth, Hale." Hale's eyes glinted with something darker, something unyielding. "Truth?" His voice dripped with disdain. "Truth is a fragile thing, Mr. Hughes. A dangerous thing. Do you understand? It has the power to unravel everything. It exposes our weaknesses, our imperfections. But lies are the only thing that gives us power. Lies maintain control. Without them, there would be nothing but chaos. Society would tear itself apart. Hughes's pulse quickened, but he stood his ground, meeting Hale's gaze with unflinching resolve. You've built your empire on manipulation, on deceit. You think you can control people with fear, with false promises. But it's all going to come down, Hale. You can't hide forever. The air between them seemed to crackle with the intensity of their exchange, a moment of rare vulnerability from Hale. He paused, his eyes darkening as if contemplating the weight of his next words. People like your wife, he said slowly, each word deliberately chosen. They were never meant to understand. Laura was a threat to the stability I've worked so hard to create. She sought the truth, but truth is dangerous. It disrupts everything. You're too late, Mr. Hughes. The people in this room, the ones you think you're protecting, they all live in a world of lies, and they thrive on it. Hughes clenched his fists, the anger rising in his chest. You think you can erase the truth, but you can't. Not this time. Hale continued, his voice growing darker, more commanding. I've controlled their minds for years. Through symbols, through stories, through fear. The painting, the corpse, it's more than just a cursed object. It's a symbol of power. A symbol that controls belief. And the relic in that abbey, it is not just a relic. It is a weapon, a tool of dominance. Religion, superstition, even culture, they are all tools to manipulate the masses. I've used them all to solidify my position. Hughes's blood ran cold at the mention of the relic, the connection to Laura's death becoming clearer. He had suspected that Hale's manipulation reached far beyond simple politics, but hearing it from Hale himself solidified the enormity of the corruption. Hale wasn't just controlling the health ministry, he was controlling the very fabric of belief and societal values. You think you're a god, Hale, Hughes said, his voice taut with the strain of holding back the rage threatening to boil over. You think you can control everything, people's minds, their lives. But there's one thing you haven't counted on. You haven't counted on the truth coming out. You haven't counted on me. Hale took a step closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. You're wrong. The truth has no place in my world, Mr. Hughes. I've made sure of it. You may have uncovered some of my secrets, but it won't matter. In the end, you'll be consumed by the same system you're trying to destroy. You'll understand, in time, that the truth is a weakness. And he paused, his smile chilling. I will always win. Hughes took a deep breath, refusing to let Hale's words rattle him. The battle had only just begun, and he knew what he had to do. He wouldn't let Hale's vision of a controlled, fearful world become a reality. He would tear down everything Hale had built, starting with the truth. With one last, icy glare, Hughes turned on his heel, leaving Hale in the quiet of the hallway, his mind already racing toward the next move. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. The sharp wail of fire alarms tore through the elegant hum of the gala, a discordant sound that shattered the evening's deceptive tranquility. Hughes's instincts kicked in immediately. He had known this would come, but the reality of it, of Hale's plan unfolding, was far more terrifying than he had imagined. Chaos erupted. Guests, once dressed in their finest attire and adorned with smiles, now screamed in panic as the first plumes of smoke began to curl through the air. The fire had started in the kitchen, but Hughes could sense that it wasn't just a simple kitchen fire, it was deliberate, a well-orchestrated attack. The flames spread rapidly, aided by the venue's outdated ventilation system, sending toxic smoke through the air like a deadly cloud. Hughes's eyes darted around the ballroom, his sharp mind already calculating the best course of action. The panic was palpable, but in the midst of it, Hughes kept his cool. He had to. People were running blindly, shoving past one another, pushing to escape. Many of them had no idea that they were being herded, unknowingly, into the very flames that Hale had set to purge them. Amidst the panic, Hughes spotted a few familiar faces, whistleblowers, journalists, and activists who had been among those Hale deemed a threat. They were trapped in the swirling madness, their escape routes blocked by the growing fire. He wasted no time. Moving swiftly through the smoke-filled halls, Hughes grabbed the nearest emergency extinguisher, spraying it over the flames as he made his way through the labyrinth of corridors. He shouted instructions to anyone who could hear him, guiding the panicked guests toward the nearest exits, though he knew that many would not make it out in time. His mind raced as he pushed through the crowd. He couldn't stop the fire. Hale had already ensured that it would spread too quickly. But he could still make a difference. Hughes worked with a sense of urgency, not only to save lives but to reach the heart of the operation. He needed to find Hale before the fire did its job, before the lives of those inside were snuffed out as easily as any threat to Hale's reign. With each step, Hughes knew that the fire wasn't just a physical blaze, it was a symbol of Hale's power. A calculated purge, a brutal act designed to eliminate the opposition in one swift, fiery moment. Hughes could feel it in the air. This was the beginning of the end, the point of no return. Hale had set the stage, and now Hughes had to play his part. The smoke thickened, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The heat was intense, and the screams of the trapped guests filled the air, adding to the overwhelming sense of dread. Hughes's thoughts remained clear, though. He knew Hale would be somewhere near the epicenter of the chaos, watching from the shadows, orchestrating the destruction. It was time to finish this, to confront Hale face to face in the heart of his operation. But first, there were lives to be saved. He reached an open stairwell leading to the building's lower levels, where the fire had already spread, and quickly ushered several guests toward the exit. Behind him, the flames roared, an angry reminder of the consequences of Hale's grand scheme. Hughes's hand tightened around the fire extinguisher as he pressed on, determined to find a way to end Hale's reign of terror before it consumed them all. As the fire raged on, Hughes's focus sharpened. He could almost hear Hale's voice in his mind, cold and calculating. This wasn't just about the fire, it was about control, about fear. But Hughes wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. Not this time. He was coming for Hale, and this time, the flames wouldn't stop him. The air grew thick with smoke as Hughes pressed forward, each breath a struggle against the choking haze. The cacophony of screams, the crackling of flames, and the sound of breaking glass filled the air, but Hughes's mind remained focused. His every step was deliberate, each choice calculated as he moved through the building's maze-like corridors. The fire was spreading quickly, and the heat was becoming unbearable. It was no longer just a matter of saving lives. It was a race against time to confront Hale before everything was consumed. As the flames began to eat through the walls, Hughes found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, there were people who needed saving, whistleblowers and witnesses who held the key to exposing Hale's dark empire. On the other, the fire was a relentless beast, closing in on him with every passing second. The building's infrastructure, weakened by age and neglect, groaned under the strain of the flames. The power to the lights flickered, casting long, ominous shadows in the halls. Hughes's sharp instincts told him the building wouldn't last much longer. His thoughts flashed to the control room. Hale was there, somewhere deep in the heart of this chaos, orchestrating the carnage from a safe vantage point. It was the place Hughes needed to reach, but getting there was no simple task. The corridors twisted and turned like a labyrinth, each path blocked by smoke, flames, or falling debris. But Hughes had no choice. He couldn't let Hale slip away now, not when he was so close to putting an end to this madness. Hughes's mind raced through the options. His first priority was to save those in immediate danger. In one hallway, a group of panicked guests stumbled toward him, disoriented by the smoke. He shouted at them, guiding them toward a safe exit. But the fire was too quick. It licked at their heels, forcing them into a dead end where the flames were closing in. Hughes turned and led them through a different path, his heart pounding as he assessed the collapsing structure around him. The building was falling apart, and every second mattered. The heat was becoming unbearable, and Hughes felt his clothing begin to smolder in the oppressive heat. Sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. He moved with urgency, pushing through the thickening smoke and the increasing noise of the fire's advance. He knew that each step brought him closer to Hale's location, but it also brought him closer to the edge of survival. There would be no turning back once he crossed the threshold of the control room. As Hughes made his way through the burning building, the smoke thickened to the point of near blindness. His pulse raced as he encountered another group of guests, this time a woman and her child trapped in a narrow hallway. The fire had already begun to curl its fingers toward them. Hughes grabbed them both, dragging them toward the nearest exit as debris fell around them. The woman's sobs and the child's terrified cries echoed in his ears, but Hughes kept his focus. Every life he saved was a small victory in the midst of the inferno, but the stakes kept rising with every passing second. He could feel the toll of the fire on his body, his lungs burning with every breath, his skin reddening from the heat. But the control room was within reach, and Hughes wasn't about to let Hale escape this time. He pushed on, ignoring the toll the fire was taking on him, knowing that his time was running out. Each turn, each obstacle, brought him closer to his goal, and to Hale's twisted grand design. With every breath, Hughes could feel the building's imminent collapse, the weight of the flames pushing him toward the final confrontation. The fire had become a living thing, an embodiment of Hale's power, and Hughes had to face it head-on. The building's corridors seemed to narrow, the walls closing in with the smoke and heat, but Hughes's resolve never wavered. In the distance, he could see it, the control room. The last bastion of Hale's operation, the place where everything, every death, every scheme, every lie, was being orchestrated. Hughes knew that once he reached that room, there would be no turning back. The fire, the smoke, the heat, they were just obstacles in the way of his final confrontation with Hale. And this time, Hughes was determined to win. But with the inferno closing in, Hughes had only moments left to make the choice: confront Hale now or risk being consumed by the flames before he could end the corruption once and for all. The control room was eerily calm amidst the chaos. The distant roar of the flames echoed through the corridors, but inside the room, Hale stood as though untouched by the inferno consuming the rest of the building. The flickering lights cast shadows across his face, accentuating the cold, calculating smile that never seemed to falter. His eyes, steely and unfazed, locked onto Hughes as he entered. Hughes's pulse pounded in his ears, a mixture of fury and desperation fueling his every step. The fire had already claimed so many lives, and this was the moment he had been fighting for, the final confrontation with Hale. But as he stood across from the man who had orchestrated so much death, Hughes could sense the ease with which Hale controlled the situation, even in the face of disaster. Hale's voice broke the silence. "It's fascinating, isn't it, Hughes? How easily you've fallen into the trap of truth. Truth is a weapon, a dangerous force that crumbles under the weight of society's needs. Lies, however, lie at the core of every great empire. They sustain, they protect, and they give people what they want: hope, stability. Without them, everything falls apart." Hughes's hands balled into fists, his heart pounding as he took a step forward. "You've destroyed everything: people, lives, and even the very truth that was supposed to set us free. What about Laura? What about her death? You were behind it all, weren't you?" Hale's smile never wavered. "Ah, Laura. Such a noble fool. She thought she could expose the truth, but in the end, she was just another pawn in a game much larger than her. Her death? It was a necessary sacrifice. But let me ask you, Hughes, what is truth, really? A fleeting moment, a half-formed memory. Lies are what give meaning, structure. They are what bind people together." "Enough!" Hughes shouted, his voice breaking the calm facade that Hale wore. "You can't justify all this with your philosophy. You've killed for control, for power. You used the truth as a weapon and now you'll pay for it." Hale's smile twitched as he stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of amusement. As the walls of the control room buckled under the fire's relentless assault, Hale remained unnervingly composed. His tailored suit was singed at the edges, but his chilling smile persisted as though even the flames answered to him. "You think this will end with me, Hughes?" Hale's voice was steady, almost taunting. "I've ensured my survival in ways you cannot fathom. Even if you kill me, the truth will still be silenced." Hughes aimed his weapon, his hands steady despite the rising smoke and heat. "You've built everything on lies, Hale. Lies burn just as easily as the walls around us." Hale's gaze sharpened, and for the first time, his voice faltered, revealing a crack in his armor. "You fool! You think exposing the truth will free them? It will destroy them. People need the illusion of stability, the comfort of control. The chaos you're so eager to unleash will kill far more than I ever did. Don't you dare try to justify this," Hughes snapped, stepping closer. "Your lies have already killed countless innocents, including my wife. You don't care about stability, you care about power. And that ends tonight." Hale took a deliberate step forward, his face twisting into something between anger and desperation. "I've been a necessary evil, Hughes. Without me, the vultures waiting in the shadows will descend. They're worse than I could ever be. If I fall, the system falls, and it will drag you down with it." Hughes hesitated for a fraction of a second, Hale's words gnawing at him. But then Laura's face flashed in his mind, her unyielding resolve shining brighter than the flames. He tightened his grip on the gun and said, "You're right about one thing, Hale, the system will fall. But it won't drag me with it. I'll make damn sure of that." He fired. Hale crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes wide, as if in disbelief that his invincibility had been shattered. Hughes spared no time mourning. He turned and sprinted from the room as the ceiling caved in, swallowing Hale and his lies in a final, fiery judgment. He barely made it out alive, stumbling into the night air, the cool breeze a stark contrast to the inferno he had left behind. He coughed, the smoke thick in his lungs, and looked back at the burning wreckage. The victory, however, felt hollow. The building, Hale's fortress, was now nothing but ash. But Hughes knew that Hale's web of corruption didn't end with him. The man's influence had spread too far, and the damage had already been done. Hughes could feel the weight of the loss, the countless lives, including Laura's, that had been torn apart by Hale's actions. Hughes staggered, disoriented, as he thought of the ledger, the clues, and the truth he had uncovered. It had all led him here, but now, as he stood amidst the wreckage, a bitter realization gnawed at him. Was Hale truly defeated? Or had this just been another layer of the grand lie? The fire may have consumed the building, but Hale's legacy, his reach, was still out there, hidden in the shadows. And Hughes knew, with a deep sense of certainty, that the battle was far from over. The inferno roared around them, its fiery tendrils licking at the edges of the control room. The walls groaned under the pressure, but in the eye of the storm, Hale stood unshaken. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, but his eyes gleamed with an unsettling calm. He was a man on the brink of ruin, yet his confidence never wavered. Stephen Raul Hughes, covered in soot and sweat, stood across from him, his pulse racing as the fire raged just beyond the door. He could hear the collapse of the building, the structure crumbling with every passing second. The world was coming apart around them, but Hale remained as composed as ever. Hale's lips curled into a twisted smile as he took a slow step forward, his voice eerily calm against the backdrop of destruction. "I could have burned all of this," Hale said, gesturing to the control room, the documents, the evidence, the ledger, and everything Hughes had fought for. "But I've been thinking, Hughes. You've come this far, and you deserve a chance, a real one." Hughes's grip tightened on the pistol in his hand, his knuckles white with tension. "I'm done listening to your lies. You'll never escape. Not this time." Hale raised his hands in mock surrender, a cold, mirthless laugh escaping his lips. "Lies? No, Hughes, this isn't about lies. This is about survival. Yours and mine. You see, you've uncovered some of the truth. But not all of it. There's more, far more, than what you've seen. The health ministry's corruption runs deeper than you could possibly understand." His eyes gleamed with dangerous knowledge. "But I can help you. I can give you everything you need to bring them down, everything you've ever wanted." Hughes's heart skipped a beat, the words cutting through the smoke-filled air. He had wanted to expose the corruption, to bring justice to his wife's death, to unravel the dark network that had cost so many their lives. But at what cost? Hale's smile widened. "I'll give you the evidence, proof that will destroy the health ministry. It will be enough to bring the entire system down. But only if you make the right choice." The heat in the room intensified, the smoke swirling around them, making it harder to breathe. Hughes's mind raced. The offer was tempting. If he accepted, he could expose the truth, bring justice, and perhaps, finally, end the madness. But there was always a price. Hale's voice dropped to a near whisper, his words sharp like a knife. "If you kill me now, the evidence dies with me. The truth you've worked so hard to uncover will vanish. All of it, gone. You've already lost so much, Hughes. Don't let this be the end." Hughes felt the weight of the decision press down on him. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to end it, to finally put an end to Hale's reign of terror. But the temptation to secure the evidence, to expose the full extent of the corruption, was nearly overwhelming. The flames crackled around them as the building began to collapse. The ceiling above groaned, and Hughes knew they didn't have much time. He could see the desperation in Hale's eyes now, a man who was willing to sacrifice anything to save himself. "What's it going to be, Hughes?" Hale asked, his voice dripping with smug certainty. "Will you continue your crusade for truth, or will you let me walk away with what's left of your precious world?" Hughes's finger hovered over the trigger of his gun, his mind torn between the urge for immediate justice and the possibility of a larger, more dangerous truth. The fire raged on, the world outside burning, and Hughes stood at the precipice of a decision that could change everything. The question echoed in his mind, what price is truth worth? The fire crackled around them, its heat pushing against Hughes like a relentless force. The building groaned and shifted, as though it were alive, struggling to survive the flames. Hale stood before him, offering an escape, a deal that promised salvation in exchange for compromise. But Hughes couldn't shake the image of Laura, her face etched into his mind as clearly as if she were standing beside him. The woman he had loved, the woman who had given everything to uncover the truth. He could almost hear her voice in the midst of the chaos, calm yet firm, urging him not to give in. "Don't let them win, Stephen." Her words echoed through his mind as his eyes flicked to Hale, who stood before him, smug and composed despite the destruction surrounding them. Laura's memory, a beacon of defiance in the darkness, burned in his chest with an intensity that matched the inferno closing in on them. She had never wavered, not even when she had uncovered the truth about the health ministry's corruption, not even when Hale had silenced her in the most brutal way possible. Laura had sacrificed everything, her career, her future, her life, because she believed in the truth. And now, Hughes was faced with the same choice, to compromise for the greater good, or to risk it all, just as she had. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like the flames encroaching on their space. Hughes's grip on his gun tightened as he closed his eyes, allowing Laura's memory to wash over him once more. He remembered the late nights they spent together, working side by side, piecing together the puzzle of corruption. He remembered the fire in her eyes when she spoke of justice, of exposing the truth. She had been fearless. The truth mattered to her more than anything else. More than safety. More than survival. Hughes could feel her presence now, as if she were urging him forward. "Don't compromise, Stephen. Don't let them win." His heart pounded in his chest as the weight of her memory grounded him in that moment. He had already lost so much. He had watched as Hale destroyed everything and everyone he had ever loved. But he would not let Hale win. He would not dishonor Laura's sacrifice by allowing this monster to walk free. Hughes raised his gun, his resolve hardening like steel. The choice was clear now. Hale would not escape. "I'm not going to let you get away with it, Hale," Hughes said, his voice cold, steady. "You took Laura's life. You tried to destroy everything she worked for. But I'm not going to let you win." Hale's smile faltered for the first time, his confident facade slipping as he realized that Hughes was no longer swayed by his offer. The air seemed to thicken as the flames raged around them, the building's structure crumbling. With a final, resolute breath, Hughes made his decision. He would not compromise. There would be no deal. There would be no escape for Hale. As Hughes steadied his aim, Laura's memory burned brighter than the fire surrounding them. This was it. The end of Hale's reign, the end of the lies. It was time to end the nightmare once and for all. The air in the control room was thick with smoke, the flames roaring like a beast that had been set free. The heat pressed down on Hughes like a physical weight, but his focus remained unwavering. With no time left for hesitation, he lunged at Hale, the gun now forgotten in his hand, as the world around them began to collapse. Hale reacted instantly, sidestepping with unsettling ease and launching a swift counterattack. The man's movements were calculated, precise. Every punch, every strike was meant to cripple, to disable. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle for control over the legacy of the system Hale had built, a system fueled by lies, manipulation, and cruelty. Hughes felt his body ache from the years of torment, from the relentless pursuit of justice for Laura. Each punch he landed on Hale's cold, unyielding frame was a release of the grief and anger that had consumed him since her death. But the longer they fought, the more it became clear that Hale was no ordinary man. The twisted mastermind was as much a product of his dark empire as the empire itself, ruthless, calculating, and always one step ahead. Hughes's vision blurred from exhaustion. His breath came in ragged gasps as the flames crept closer, licking at the edges of the room, threatening to swallow them whole. But still, he pressed forward. Every strike he made was a reminder of Laura's sacrifice, of the lives lost, of the unrelenting grip Hale had on the city and the people within it. Hughes fought with everything he had left, knowing that if he faltered, Hale would escape to continue his reign of terror. Hale grinned through the pain, his expression eerily calm despite the chaos. "You still don't understand, do you, Hughes?" he sneered, landing a crushing blow to Hughes's midsection, knocking the wind out of him. "The truth isn't something people can handle. It's too dangerous. That's why we must control it." Hughes coughed, blood mixing with the smoke in his lungs, but he didn't give up. "I'm not here for your twisted philosophy, Hale," Hughes spat, wiping blood from his lip. "I'm here to end it. To make sure you never hurt anyone again." The room seemed to close in on them, the flames growing higher, the ceiling beginning to buckle under the heat. Time was running out. With one last burst of energy, Hughes surged forward, tackling Hale to the ground, pinning him beneath him as the flames reached their peak. They struggled, both men drenched in sweat and blood, but Hughes held on. "You're finished," Hughes said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "This ends now." Hale's eyes burned with a strange intensity, a final, defiant glint that spoke of the man's refusal to surrender. But in that moment, Hughes realized something crucial. Hale's empire had always been built on fear, on control, on lies. It wasn't invincible. And it was crumbling now. With a final, brutal strike, Hughes incapacitated Hale, knocking him unconscious. The building around them groaned, the flames roaring louder as the walls began to give way. Hughes knew he had no time left. He had won, at least this battle, but the war was far from over. Hale's empire was vast, and it would take more than this one victory to truly bring it down. As he stood over Hale's fallen form, the weight of what he had accomplished, and what still lay ahead, hung heavy in the smoke-filled air. The building was collapsing, and Hughes could hear the rumble of destruction closing in on him. But in that moment, as the flames began to consume everything, Hughes could almost feel Laura's presence beside him, her voice a whisper in the chaos. "You did it, Stephen. You didn't give up. It wasn't over. Not yet." But Hughes had finally taken the first step toward ending the nightmare. And for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The flames roared around them, the heat intensifying with every passing second. Hughes's hands shook, not from fear but from the overwhelming weight of what he had just achieved. Hale, bloodied and broken beneath him, glared up with unrelenting malice, but Hughes paid it no mind. His focus remained on the fragile bundle of documents he had managed to retrieve from the wreckage, proof of Hale's dark empire, proof of the health ministry's systemic corruption that had led to the deaths of so many innocent people. The papers were scorched at the edges, but the ink was still legible, enough to bring Hale down, enough to bring down everything he had built. The ledger, the records, the damning evidence that could destroy the very foundations of the system Hale had manipulated for so long. Hughes clenched the documents in his hand, feeling the weight of them as if they were a chain binding him to a past he could never forget. Hale's breathing was labored, his defiance unwavering, even as the inferno consumed the building around them. His eyes gleamed with that same cold, calculating rage. "You think this will change anything, Hughes?" Hale croaked, his voice strained, yet full of venom. This is nothing. You can expose all the lies you want, but the world will never be the same again. They'll see you as just another martyr for a lost cause." Hughes ignored the words, his mind sharp despite the overwhelming heat. He was no martyr. He was the one who had fought for justice, the one who had sacrificed everything to bring the truth to light. With every step he took to drag Hale from the wreckage, he knew that the truth, no matter how hard it would be to bear, was the only weapon strong enough to bring down the empire Hale had so carefully built. "You're done, Hale," Hughes said, his voice low but filled with unwavering resolve. "You've underestimated the power of truth." Hale's glare intensified, but Hughes didn't flinch. He lifted Hale to his feet, pushing him forward through the smoke-filled chaos, out of the collapsing building. The structure groaned with every passing second, the flames licking at their heels, but Hughes's resolve was ironclad. Hale had taken so much from him, from the world. Hughes wasn't going to let him die in this fire, no. He would live to see justice served, to watch the walls of Hale's empire come crashing down. The once glittering gala, now reduced to a hellish landscape of smoke, rubble, and flames, was quickly becoming a tomb. Hughes stumbled through the debris, every step harder than the last, the weight of Hale's crimes bearing down on him as heavily as the fire that raged around them. He could feel his own body nearing its limits, but he refused to stop. As they reached the exit, the sounds of destruction behind them seemed to grow louder. Hughes was sweating, his muscles aching, but he kept moving, dragging Hale forward, securing the evidence that would seal the man's fate. They had both been tested, one by the fire, one by the will to survive, but only one of them would emerge victorious. And it wouldn't be Hale. With a final, exhausted push, Hughes threw Hale out into the open air, watching as the man collapsed on the cold pavement. Hale's eyes, filled with hatred and rage, never left Hughes as he lay there, defeated for the moment. Hughes stood over him, clutching the evidence, his heart pounding with the realization that this war was not over, but it was a victory, nonetheless. As Hughes looked back at the burning building, the collapse of everything Hale had built seemed almost poetic. He could still hear the crackling of the flames, feel the heat in his bones, but now it was different. The fire had claimed everything, but it had also revealed the truth. And Hughes knew this, the truth, no matter how ugly or painful, would survive. It would be the foundation for something new, something that would finally expose the darkness Hale had wrought. It was over for Hale, and for Hughes, it was just the beginning. The heat of the fire still clung to Hughes as he stood over Hale, who was sprawled on the ground, broken and bloodied, but not defeated in spirit. The world around them was a blur of smoke and ash, the remnants of a battle that had only just begun. Hughes could feel the weight of the evidence in his hand, but even as the truth began to materialize in his mind, Hale's words echoed through his thoughts like the faintest whisper of a dark omen. Hale coughed, blood staining his lips, but he smiled, sickeningly calm despite everything. His voice, rough and labored, cut through the chaos. "Expose me," he sneered, his words dripping with contempt, "and they'll replace me by morning. The world doesn't want the truth. They never have. You think this will change anything? You think you've won?" Hughes felt the words sink into his chest like a dagger. Hale was right, in a way. The system that had allowed Hale to flourish was far larger and deeper than one man could ever comprehend. The truth, even if revealed, would be buried beneath layers of corruption, of lies that stretched to every corner of society. A system built on deceit was not easily undone, no matter how much evidence Hughes held in his hand. The fire around them had died down, but in the aftermath, Hughes could still feel the burn, the cost of this victory weighing heavily on him. He had fought so long, endured so much, to get here, only to realize that this was just one battle in an endless war. Hale's empire may have crumbled, but as he had warned, others would rise in his place. New figures would step into the void, eager to take control, perpetuating the cycle of manipulation and oppression. Hughes closed his eyes for a brief moment, his exhausted body trembling with the toll of the fight. Laura's memory burned in his mind, her face, her unwavering determination to uncover the truth. He had done this for her, for all those who had suffered at Hale's hands, but even now, in the bitter aftermath, Hughes knew he had only scratched the surface. The truth would never be enough on its own. It had to be fought for, over and over again, in the face of all that was corrupt, all that was wrong. The cost would never stop, and the price would continue to rise. Hale's mocking smile never wavered as he lay there, defeated, but somehow triumphant in his final words. "You think you're a hero? Heroes are nothing more than stories, Hughes. The truth you fight for, it's a fleeting thing. The world is built on lies, and that's the only truth that matters." The words haunted Hughes as he stood above him, the evidence in his hand like a scar of his own. Hale's legacy of pain and manipulation would not die easily. But Hughes was not the type to give up, not now, not ever. He wasn't just fighting for the truth, he was fighting for something deeper, something worth saving. He would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Even if it meant facing endless battles, even if it meant standing against a world too afraid to confront the rot at its core. The fight for justice had no easy answers. But it was a fight Hughes was willing to keep waging. As the authorities arrived, dragging Hale away in cuffs, Hughes knew this was far from over. It was only the beginning. The truth would come, no matter how much the world tried to bury it. Epilogue. Hale's arrest sent shockwaves through the nation. The trial, broadcasted across every screen, captivated the public. The evidence Hughes had fought so hard to recover became the cornerstone of sweeping reforms within the health ministry. Whistleblowers were protected, corrupt officials brought to justice, and the veil of secrecy surrounding the ministry's dark dealings was lifted, exposing a network of lies that had been allowed to fester for decades. The nation's eyes were opened, and for a brief moment, justice seemed to prevail. Laura's name was spoken with reverence as her role in uncovering the truth became the symbol of courage that inspired countless others to stand against corruption. Yet, despite the victory, Hughes knew the truth was never as simple as it seemed. Hale's network, though fractured, still had powerful tendrils reaching deep into the political and corporate realms. The battle for truth was far from over. For every leader taken down, 1,000 more could rise to take their place. The system was broken, but it was far from dead. Hughes had only scratched the surface, and as much as he wished for a peaceful resolution, he knew better than to believe it would come so easily. It was a late afternoon when Hughes left the courthouse, the weight of the trial's conclusion settling in his bones. The cold wind cut through his coat, and for a moment, he wondered if it would ever feel like enough. He had achieved what he set out to do. Hale was convicted, the evidence was irrefutable, and the reforms were in motion. But Laura's absence was still a constant ache, and the battle still loomed ahead. As Hughes made his way back to his apartment, he found a package waiting for him on his doorstep. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the moment he saw the photograph inside, his heart skipped a beat. It was a picture of Laura, burned at the edges, her face obscured in places by charred remnants, but unmistakable nonetheless. A quiet, haunting reminder of everything he had lost. Beneath the photo was a note, its message brief but chilling. "The truth is fragile, detective. Handle it with care." The words echoed in his mind as he held the photograph, the weight of its meaning sinking in. He had been given a victory, but the war was far from over. Whoever had sent this message, whoever had gone to the trouble of reminding him of the cost of truth, knew that the game was far from finished. Hughes looked out at the city from his window, the dark skyline casting long shadows across the streets below. The flames of his past had finally been extinguished, but the embers still smoldered. A new fire had been lit within him, a fire born of resolve, of determination, of knowing that the battle for justice would never be fully won, not until every lie was exposed, every conspiracy brought into the light. He wasn't finished. Not yet. The truth may be fragile, but Hughes had learned how to fight for it. And no matter what it cost, no matter how many times it was buried, he would rise again.
The abbey stands silent, the relic lies shattered, and in its ruins truth has finally spoken. But justice never comes without cost. You've just heard the final episode of the case files of Detective S.R.H, written by me, Raul, for Audible Archives. Thank you for walking every dark hallway, every bleeding truth, every unsolved scream with me. If this story has stayed with you, like, comment, and subscribe. Let these voices echo where silence once reigned. Detective S.R.H may have closed his case, but some legends never rest. Another chapter closes, but the archives remain, waiting for the next seeker of stories. Here, no voice is lost, no tale truly ends. This is Audible Archives. Until we meet again, may your mind wander freely and your heart never forget the stories we share.